Bam! I hope we are live, and I hope you can hear me. Let me know in the chat if you're hearing me. I see Michael from Southwest Michigan. Oh, I've been to Michigan. Great place. And I see Born to be Great. Always good to see you. Oh, wonderful. Rob Fulton is in the house. Thanks as always for your support and being a channel member. And I see Justin and Joseph and Joby Master and the Oz 91. Good. Good to see some familiar faces. And not sure if I'm actually being heard or not. Hope so. Let me know if you can hear me or not, because I don't want to miss a thing here with our polymath strategies. And, you know, the polymath topic is just a very, very important skill to have, because you want to master multiple topics. And it is just the greatest thing to be able to have skills in excess of just a couple. And I ran a survey, and people were saying that, you know, the vast majority of people want to have multiple skills and topic area mastery and so on. So that is totally doable. And I got some really interesting questions that came up on our community tab. So thanks to everybody who sent those in. But they have to do with like how long and how practical it is and the 10,000 hour rule and all that sort of stuff. And I think the answer about the 10,000 rule will surprise you. So I guess the Oz says, hearing you 5x5. This may be the first live stream on the channel in 3 years or so. Yeah, well, that's a good point, the Oz, because I have to practice this skill that I've actually let go. And the technology has changed, and it's kind of, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound. And here we are. So I'm going to assume then that I can be heard, and I will keep up with the chat. But why don't we just dive into things as we go? Make sure to put in whatever it is that your heart and your mind feels like asking or talking about. And I will just start with what I think is the most important thing, which is having some kind of mindset that's going to set you up for success with the polymathic journey. Because here's the biggest thing, and it's the takeaway of takeaways. You cannot know what's going to happen. You have to overcome the fear of the unknown, because no matter how many hills you climb, no matter how many accomplishments you accomplish, there's going to be more unknowns. That's just the way that it works. And I have endless emails from people saying, well, I want to get it right from the get-go, and they want to know that this is going to be the best possible strategy for this or that thing. And, you know, that's normal. It's human. But extraordinary results don't come from normal or human. They come from this somewhat abnormal ability to feel the fear and do it anyway, right? And that's just absolutely really, really important. So how do you overcome the fear of the unknown? Well, probably whoever figures that out is going to get a Nobel Prize. And yet at the same time, paradoxically, contradictorily, we know how to overcome fear. Breathing exercises, lots of journaling, making sure your vision is very, very clear to yourself. And, you know, hit the thumbs up for that, because when you have a clear vision, you don't have so many fears around the decisions to make. Now, sometimes you might, and then if you have enough people around you that you can run ideas past, they can help see what you don't see, show you your blind spots, confirm what your thinking is. Sometimes just give you a pat on the back if you need it. And that's another part of this whole skill of being polymathic, is having the skill of networking and having those supports around you, people to talk to. And if you rob yourself of that, it's going to be very, very difficult. And so keep that in mind as a very, very important aspect of this whole game, is making sure that you overcome the fear of the unknown and you actually make that one of your skills. Because you can't make decisions if you don't know who you are. You can't make decisions if you don't know where you're going, or it's very, very difficult. And it doesn't matter how fast you're going if it's in the wrong direction, right? That's a quote that is often circulated, and it's very, very important to keep that in mind, that if you are going real fast and it's in some bizarre and incorrect or less than optimal direction, well then, what's the point, right? So we want to always keep that in mind. Okay, so hope that makes sense. In terms of building confidence, it may be that you need to get some emotional intelligence or some other kinds of intelligence, multiple intelligences. Tony Buzan was a big fan of multiple intelligences, and one of them, and probably one of the biggest ones, is emotional intelligence, because you can use that as a mnemonic tool. And one of the things that helps me memorize as probably the key mnemonic mode besides the kinesthetic mode and the cognitive mode or the conceptual mode is the emotional mode. What are the emotions that are inside of this? The fears, the wishes, the longings, Sehnsucht, as they say in German. And it's just so fundamentally important to have, when it comes to interdisciplinary skills, a real deep connection with your emotions. So that's really quite important. And that will help you build confidence, because you'll know what your emotional responses are to things, and when they arise, you'll be able to push through anyway, and you'll know what other emotions are out there that you might encounter. So one thing, if you're going to go around talking about being a polymath or just developing lots of skills, going beyond a jack of all trades, but literally someone with mastery of multiple things, you're going to get criticism. I've had criticism on some of my videos about the polymath topic, and literally people have said, you're not a polymath. And you have to be prepared. Like, what is their emotion that causes them to have time in the day to say something that is really meant to bring someone down instead of raise them up, right? And it's such a weird thing to say, because poly means many, and you just have some sort of familiarity with things to a certain level of skill. So we don't need to go on and on about all the books that I've written, which I had to learn not just writing, but publishing, because I publish pretty much everything I've ever done except for some scholarly stuff. And when I was in university, I had the skill of going to university to research and so forth, but I published books like this. This is a handmade book. Now, I didn't do it by myself. I had a partner named Rob Reed, and this book is really, I'm not patting myself on the back, but it's an extraordinary feat of engineering, because if you know open letter, then you know what this is. You know it's a parody instantly when it says closed book, because open letter was a journal that looked exactly like this in Canada. And we used all our skills that we had to make it look, this book look exactly the same, except for this closed book part here. Although it doesn't look exactly the same because of the back cover has some features. And also what we did is we literally made it a closed book. So all of these pages are actually closed. So you have to cut them open to read them. And so in order to make that possible, we made sure to include a knife for people to open the book. So these are the kinds of skills that I had while going to university and so forth. And we got a lot of criticism about this, because the actual editor of Open Letter became quite angry. So we had to learn to deal with emotions. And, we knew that it was a bit controversial what we were doing, but this is my point. When you know a lot about emotions, you can prepare yourself for the emotions and then just keep doing your thing anyway. Because what else are you going to do except for your thing? Does that make sense? Can I get a hell yeah if that makes sense to people? Emotions. Understand the drivers and always understand your own. And then understand also that you will sometimes get lost and not really see these emotional components, and you'll have to get back on the training wheels, get the training wheels back on, and then go through the learning process again. So that's very, very important. Now, along with this is humility, right? So it's fun for us to make a parody and really make fun of Open Letter and so forth and have a lot of fun with it. But, we didn't do it as an attack. We had to be humble as well when the editor, kind of was not that happy about it. But the humility is going to come time and time again, because one of the things that you learn when you study multiple topics and you develop multiple skills is there's another one and another one and another one, and there's always somebody who's better than you at it. So humility comes from one simple thing. I don't like to say never too much, but I'm going to say it now. Never, ever, ever, ever play games of comparison. You cannot compare yourself against others. If you do that, you're asking for suffering. You're asking for pain. Born to be Great says, know thyself in the chat. That is very, very good. But let's add some nuance to that, because I think a lot of people don't know this. The idea of know thyself is Platonic, and it means literally know thyself relative to the forms. So what are the forms? In Platonic theory, the forms really belong in what's sometimes called the form of the good, which is heaven. And so the idea is that somewhere in heaven or some other place is a perfect existence of, the classic example is of a chair or a stool. So somewhere in heaven, there is the perfect version of this stool, right? And this is a shadowy copy of the perfect stool. And it's quite unique, but somewhere there's an actual perfect one, right? So I'm so happy I have visual aids. The thing about knowing yourself relative to the forms is kind of what I'm just saying. Know your own emotions relative to the other emotions that appear in others, right? And so know thyself, but know thyself relative to other things. Very, very important. So thank you, Born to be Great, for raising that. Absolutely love that. Anyway, in terms of humility, to sort of tie that up, just always realize that whatever your skill set is, there's someone ahead of you, there's someone behind you. And that's part of a strategy. Because if you can be cognitively aware and have metacognition around the fact that you are on a journey, you're climbing a mountainside, and there's someone ahead of you and there's someone behind you, well, you can communicate with both, right? You can absolutely have both be part of your journey. So the people who are ahead of you can help pull you forward. The people behind can help push you forward, but they can also drag you back. And the people ahead of you can actually say things that cause you to lose your footing. And so then you've got to, think. Like, there's a Buddhist meditation where, I won't go through the whole thing, but one part of the Buddhist meditation is you imagine yourself crossing a bridge, and down below you see a party, and all your friends are there, and they are preparing the presents that they're going to give to you for your birthday or whatever reason they're celebrating. But on the other side of the bridge is a bunch of enemies who are shooting arrows that are on fire at your bridge, right? And so in this particular metaphor, it's not a mountainside, but you are going across a horizontal bridge, and you have friends and enemies at all times, every step of the way, and you got to keep your eye on both of them, right? So the humility is going to be there. No matter how many people you have cheering you on, you got to watch out for the arrows that are on fire that are coming to this bridge that you're walking across. So there's humility. Then, in terms of just the big picture of taking on multiple skills, we've talked about being basically willing to embrace the fear. Do it anyway, because fear is never going away. You want to be open-minded to all kinds of various things that you can never possibly imagine in advance, and just realize that, you have to just deal with that. But then also, you can use a kind of visualization. Now, I know a lot of us are not visual, and so when I say visualization, I don't mean high-definition television in your mind. I don't even mean pictures all the time. What I really mean is a multi-sensory approach. So visualization can be really just thinking a lot about how things are going to be, how your skills are going to work out. You can use visualization to learn music better, for example. You can use visualization to complete sports. It's quite well studied in sports performance, right? Imagining all those different dribbles of the ball and how you're going to lay up and get a swish and all that sort of stuff in basketball, for example. These people really have it worked out in their minds, but they also have a great emotional comfort, and they're willing to let go of the outcome. They never know from game to game what's going to happen, but they do it anyway, right? They're open to it. They're open for whatever needs to happen to happen. So you can actually practice visualizing that. as much as possible. And that might not sound like the most practical thing in the world, but really it is. And there's many ways to visualize. And one thing that I practiced for years, and it actually worked, and one of the reasons why it works is because it's just obvious, but it sounds self-helpy and woo-woo, but it really isn't when you think about it, especially if you can't visualize, which is to make a treasure map and have that treasure map visual on the wall, an actual picture of what it is you want to realize. So I've done this quite a few times, and I'm actually doing a new one now because I've realized everything that was on the previous 2 treasure maps. And it's really wonderful how it works. So you need multiple skills in order to pull off what I had on my treasure map. But, you start somewhere. So you might just need to think, what are my multiple skills? And get them visualized on a treasure map. And this is not a mind map. So a mind map would be you drawing representations of things. But this is literally pictures of the actual thing as close as possible on a piece of paper. And the way I did it is I had 6 usually. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in 2 columns. And I just never let that vision out of my sight. And it's just kind of, it's almost related to what's called implicit memory. It gets into your skin because you don't even necessarily notice that you're looking at it, but it's always in your visual field. And then it just rubs off. I don't know exactly, I don't have the budget to get brain scans of how all this works, but I would like to one day. And it's helped me a lot. And when I first did it, I had that treasure map in every room it was a basement suite I was living in at the time, so that I would see it everywhere. And everything there happened. Same thing with the second one. Everything there happened. And now I got new things, and I got to figure out what pictures I'm going to put on it, but I'm building another one or planning to build another one. And it's very, very important. And it's not law of attraction. It's not manifestation. It's maybe priming, and it's a reminder. It's literally a reminder is what it is, because we often forget. And some of us just don't see pictures in our minds. So how are you going to visualize? Well, just make it visual. And I resisted this when I first heard about it. I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. But some things turned me around. I've told the story before in The Victorious Mind, and I'm really glad that it got turned around. It's super, super powerful and wonderful. Okay, so I hope all that makes sense. Visualize somehow. You can use mind mapping too, but I would recommend that you really have actual pictures on a piece of paper, just a standard piece of paper. And there's a video on the channel where I share that if you want to look it up. Okay, so we have that. And the other thing I would say is self-reflection. And you can reflect in your mind or reflect in writing. Keeping a journal, I think, is one of the best things I ever started to do. And I've journaled in many, many ways. Always have one in my pocket. It's very, very powerful. Writing out over and over and over again, not only what your goal is in words or your set of goals, the skill sets that you want to develop, but also a description of it as if it's already happening, so that you're feeling it. You're literally putting all your energy into it. And again, I know that sounds kind of like from the woo-woo world, but it's one of the few things from that world that I really, really know to be true. And it only makes sense. And we know because there are things like this in sports performance that are very, very well studied. And not only that, this is about performance, right? So how are you going to perform if you don't prime the pump, right? That sounds weird. Prime the pump. But I'll say it anyway. Prime the pump of your polymathic skill set that you want to develop, right? Okay, so I see a lot of chat coming in. I'm going to catch up with a lot of things. Shane is talking about, as a polymath, what's your note-taking method? I'll talk a little bit about that. But Shane, as a preview to whet the appetite, it's not about one note-taking method. It's about several. Because you can't just, I can't have just one. And I wouldn't recommend just one to others either. But we'll get to that. And I will review the chat near the end. But let's talk a little bit. Well, let me say this about journaling as well. One thing that's really helpful, this is all mindset stuff that we're covering now, that's so important. Do not reduce the importance of mindset. I have to work on my mindset all the time. And, I've seen some dark days when I don't work on my mindset. It's really bad policy. Of course, I stopped working on my mindset so that I could create the character called David Williams, who is in this memory detective novel, some of you have read, I know, called Flyboy. And that was good and bad to actually do a little bit of, I wouldn't really intend to do method acting as such, but I wanted to drop my meditation or reduce it for a while and stop doing some of these activities that have kept me happy. And it made me better able to write a character who is absolutely miserable. And that, was a bit of a challenge. And so it's a mindset thing. I actually reduced my mindset. And now I'm finally, after finishing most of the sequel, getting back to working on my mindset stuff. So don't reduce its importance, because I've seen it both ways. I've seen, really cranking it up, and I've seen reducing it, and it just gets to be quite a dark thing. So mindset is so very important, and journaling your gratitude. This is known in the science. You can actually literally feel better. So why do you need all this? Well, it's going to help prime you so that you actually have a clearer, cleaner mind to show up and do what it needs to do what it takes to get as much action consistently as you can without getting ground in the gears of negative self-talk or self-doubt or fear and all that sort of stuff. And so the other thing about mindset really that I'll say for now is embrace failure. It's going to come, and it's a gift in many, many circumstances. It never feels good. It feels terrible most of the time. But what you can do with it is analyze it, get lessons from it, and then you can use those lessons to chart a better path forward. And you have to have a mindset that's willing to do that, right? So this is really, really important. Hamza says, how can we pair these observations onto our cards in Zettelkasten? Hamza, please let me know, what do you mean, which observations? Because if you mean the bullet points of what I'm talking about today, then that would be great. But if you mean any specific ones, let me know so I can address ones that are most interesting to you and use a specific example. All right, so I think it would be very, very helpful to look a little bit at the history of this idea of being a polymath. Because I was talking with my friend William the other day, and we were talking about categories, and he thought that categories must pre-exist language and how that humans operate in the world. And, one of the examples is if there aren't categories, how does a fish know how to, find some food? Like, it needs to somehow recognize that food is food and not poison, and so therefore it must have a category machine in its mind. And I thought, oh, hang on a second. That's what humans do. Humans say those kinds of things, right? And so we're categorizing and anthropomorphizing, making fish do what humans do. But it's not necessarily clear that that's what they do. Category is born, I believe, or discovered, and humans then become category addicts, right? And it's very, very important to at least think that through. You don't have to agree with me, although if you get into a debate with me about it, I will not back down until that it is clear that categories are not natural, or they're at least not, well, see, that's the problem. We are always categorizing, natural, not natural. We have to move beyond category and see that category, it is born in history. So a very simple example of this that has to do with polymathy is that there was a period in history when the self-portrait emerged. There was a time when artists never drew themselves. They drew fish, they drew horses, they drew other people, but they didn't make a self-portrait of themselves. And there was literally a day in history when someone, Dürer, I think, wrote his name on a portrait of himself. And there, on that day, the self-portrait was born. So the category self-portrait didn't exist before. So part of polymathy is, and this is a very big point, is that you decide that that's what you're going to be. You name it. You categorize yourself, or you set the path towards the category. And this happened in history, right? And it's very, very important. And it was huge in the Renaissance. I think it starts a little bit earlier than the Renaissance, but you can think about Da Vinci, for example, as having a number of skills. This happened in history. The role of the Enlightenment thinkers is really, really huge here. And I don't want to go on a big lecture of that. But there's a period in history where Greek literature returns or starts to fulminate in the Western, so to speak, Enlightenment. And they become, back to what Born to Be Great was putting in there, know thyself. They came to be very, very concerned with the Platonic concerns about what a self is. A self relative, not to knowing itself, but knowing itself relative to the forms. What are good things? Well, good things are being self-fulfilling, being able to take care of yourself, being able to take care of others, ideally, being able to essentially write your destiny, right? This happens. And part of it has to do with the Platonic and Neoplatonic material that enters into the culture. And it is huge, right? There's Asian polymaths that emerge as well. There are polymaths that go to Asia, like Matteo Ricci, and just so many stories that you can look into. Now, what happens? And of course, I'm not Mr. History here, but just to give the biggest, broadest picture, what happens eventually is the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution starts to make at scale the ability to not only create certain things, but to consume them. Now, why? It's not just, the printing press is already there. And people are making their own books. And, Giordano Bruno, who I am writing a book about right now, if you don't know that guy, there's his statue. And this is one of my favorite books about him. He was a memory master, wrote lots of books like De Ombris Idearum, and on and on. He used to actually put fake names of printers so that people wouldn't be able to get the people who printed his books in trouble. And all kinds of things like this were happening. But the Industrial Revolution, what it does is it not only enables more people to buy more stuff, but it has eventually trains, planes, and automobiles, right? And boats. And when people are able to actually print their material, and then eventually 1895 cinema comes, absolutely distribute all kinds of material around the world in a way that we had never seen before, then more and more people are aware of skills that they can adopt. So the person who writes plays can now write plays and screenplays, and they can learn how to operate cameras. And then eventually they can learn how to operate cameras and sound, and then direct actors, and on and on. So if you just look into cinema itself, there are many, many polymathic people inside of cinema. They know a lot about history, so they can write plays or screenplays, and then they know a lot about endless technological means of getting images on screens that are engaging, right? And then the other skill on top of that is not just the getting of the compelling images on screens that tell stories, but the industry, the packing of theaters, the distribution of the films to the theaters. And then you get synergy of products, which is another skill on top of that, which is to turn the movies into novelizations and soundtracks and posters and images on McDonald's soft drink cups, and on and on and on. That is a form of polymathy, having all those skills, understanding this depth of what you can do that is enabled initially by the Industrial Revolution. So there's that. And you have travel, people being able to go all around the world and actually meet other people in all kinds of different ways, which basically influences education systems. Education systems start to study each other and advance as well. So there's a lot of things to talk about there. And, we can go into individual figures, etc., but we have institutions that start to support polymathy. And I was a benefactor of them because I was in the first cohort of the humanities PhD at York University. Humanities was interdisciplinary in nature. The idea is that you would not be a jack of all trades, but a master of a couple of topics, which you would then fuse together to create a coherent set of connections between various disciplines. That's an institution supporting polymathy or polymathy. And it's very, very important. Now, this has been enfeebled a little bit since that I started, but I was able to get through. I was, in fact, the first person to graduate from the program, and that was quite fun, even though a bit lonely. But in any case, in that year, only 13% of people in Canada finished their PhD. So I was among a very small, lonely group. In any case, that history, I think, is really important to think through because you're joining a legacy group. And that legacy group is shaped by what's going on. So think about these various different things that enable it, or enable you to do your work, and what tools you have. What tools are going to help you and what tools are going to hinder you? How are you going to use AI intelligently so that it actually supplements but not cause some sort of learned helplessness, right? Very, very important. So that's a cultural attitude partly. It's a mindset attitude to how you're going to deal with technology. But think always about what institutions can support you. Because I was supported by an institution, and it's a huge part of how that I got here, even though I was already doing a lot of different things before that. Part of how it compounded and stacked was that I had institutional support. And then later I got the Mercator grant and so on. So enough about me. Let's look at some of our questions here and make sure that we catch up. So let me know what you have in your mind. Justin said, motivated by your work, how can I integrate personal somatic feedback into my Memory Palace walkthroughs? Thank you for that, Justin. Can you say in the chat what you mean by personal somatic feedback? I know what somatic refers to, but I don't know what personal somatic feedback refers to. Lugano is here. Oh, good to see you, Lugano. Wonderful, wonderful. The Oz said, I think the most valuable recent video is how to teach yourself. I can be expected to do plenty of vision statements this year. Thank you for that. And yeah, if you haven't seen the Teach Yourself video, check that out on the channel. Joby Master says probably close to 30 Memory Palaces he has. And he managed to get the Memory Palace thing down, but only for cramming. He's planning to figure out how to make it a daily practice now. Excellent, excellent. Daily practice is key. And let's see. Born to be Great says, hope you talk about focus, not only from an enablement standpoint, but also how to maintain it the longest possible. All right, so what you want to work on, and thanks for that question, Born to be Great, and for joining us. Thumbs up for this one. This is a good question. Focus, I mean, I would first define what it is for you to be focused, and then think about how you can generate some memories of when you were focused and reverse engineer what created focus for you and start from there. Then, in order to build it up and maintain it, I mean, I kind of got to lean on my own experience with this, but as I talked about in The Victorious Mind, cruising altitude or flow state is built. It's not a gift. It's not genetics. It's literally a designed thing. And what worked for me may not necessarily work for you, but there's a strong blueprint, and the blueprint that worked for me is basically quite well known to work for very, very many people. So what it is essentially is building a lifestyle practice that favors tonic dopamine over phasic dopamine. So a lot of people have way too much phasic dopamine. And it's because they're just constantly with the notifications, constantly flipping between tabs on the browser, constantly going from this screen to that screen. And it's just boom, 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 dopamine spikes, right? Now, about a year ago this time, there was some controversy. And a bunch of people were saying, apps aren't really that bad for your dopamine. You don't need a dopamine reset, blah, 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 blah. And what was hilarious about these people saying that is, at least one of them, I lost temporarily a fair amount of respect for the person, but I'm forgiving. But on this particular channel, the host of the channel went from talking about how apps are not a problem for creating phasic dopamine issues, but now let me pitch you the app that I advertise. And it was just, that same app has asked me many, many times, and I still have a free account with them, to advertise them on my channel, and I just simply will not. I looked around on their free account recently just to see if anything had changed, and nothing has changed, and I still don't want to advertise it. But think about that. There are a lot of people who are saying, oh no, phasic dopamine spikes are not a problem, and then pitching you an app. Of course, they're not particularly motivated to tell you what the research actually says. So tonic dopamine is a more or less regular level of good, focused concentration, awareness. And if you have phasic dopamine spikes, you can return quite quickly to that maintained state. Now, how do you maintain it? Well, there's a couple of things. I really do think that dopamine fasting or dopamine resetting is key. I do it pretty much every single day. Get outside, spend a couple hours away from any device. And having a physical book is a no-brainer for that. And ideally, that physical book is like this, thick, substantial. There's something really, really good inside of it, and you really enjoy it. Or it could look like this. It doesn't matter what it looks like. But I tend to bring 2 or 3 books, and then I interleave between them, which is very, very important. Because as the mental power, starts to fade on one topic, rather than stopping reading after 15, 20 minutes when it's like, this writing style is getting a bit tedious or it's too challenging, just switch books. Stand up, stretch a little bit, breathe, and then switch books. That's part of maintaining the focus, is not pushing, it's power, not force. So many people cram. They push themselves. Push, have to get through this book. I read 100 pages yesterday, but I read 100 pages in small doses, and I switched between 3 books, and it was amazing because I got more out of it. And there's memory benefits. It's called interleaving, switching between books. I like the term switching between books, but the actual scientific term is interleaving. So that's part of it. And then the other thing is diet, sleep, exercise. These are not, a lot of people, that it's not their favorite topics, but it's a really, really important topic. Brian says, I notice my tonic dopamine seems to be the main driver of my weekdays, and weekends are far easier to be hijacked by phasic dopamine tendencies because of the lack of structure. Thanks for sharing that, Brian. Yeah, well, one of the things that for me is that I just don't acknowledge weekends. It sounds kind of weird, right? But a day is a day. And when you think about it, like, it's a weekend because it ends the week, but a week is it's a structure. It's this thing that our culture put together. Just because weekends are there doesn't mean you have to use them. But if you're going to use them to recharge. I prefer to have a weekend every day, which is partly accomplished by dopamine fasting. Getting out of the house, doing some exercise, reading without any device around, without any interruptions, except for perhaps the lovely nature, which I like to pause and look at and so forth. And then just refreshed every day. I don't need to recharge during the weekend. And yeah, I mean, everybody gets challenged with the dopamine hijacking, but you can minimize your exposure to online stuff and have very, very targeted goals so that when you're online, what you're doing there is on point, as opposed to all over the place, right? Unless you're studying all over the place-ness, which I have done. So it's good to surrender yourself to study it, I guess, once in a while, but have a plan for getting out, because it's a horrible place to be, to have your mind start to be all over the place, because it's emulating through procedural memory imprinting how the internet works and how online scrolling works. You're just and then you crave it, right? It's normal to crave that exposure, because that's what happens. That's the natural consequence of so much exposure. So moving away is very, very important. Okay, so I hope Born to be Great, that helps give you some ideas of what to do and how to do it to maintain focus and build it up. Build it up every day. Every morning I do the same things, and it never gets boring. Just sit, meditate, chant my Sanskrit, do my journaling, and do my Qigong, my breathing, then get on with the work. And the work is usually done in the same order every day. Not entirely, but because enough days are done in exactly that way, then when interruptions come and spontaneous opportunities to hang out with somebody come, just can grab it and do it, right? So it's really, really important. Okay. Rob says, Nikki and I do Friday and Saturday, Sunday on rotation, but most of the time I forget what day it is. Don't tell my memory coach. Yeah, this isn't a great place to not tell your memory coach, but thanks for sharing that. And you say you pretend that Friday is on the start of our 3-day weekend, and it has worked beautifully. Haven't felt the Mondays in months. That's great. The point here, I think, if I can read between the lines, is that you're seeing the artificial human-made structure of the week pattern within the month pattern, within the year pattern, within the quarterly pattern, that is just, it's a convention. But you don't have to necessarily operate that way, right? So that's a really, really important thing to keep in mind. Okay, so let's see, what else am I missing here? The Hamza had asked about combining some of these tips with the Zettelkasten. I wouldn't necessarily use a Zettelkasten approach for this kind of presentation immediately. If I'm taking notes from a live stream presentation like this, I might just use a standard notebook and go in a linear formation. When I use Zettelkasten is when I'm extracting information from books. And sometimes I will use them in lectures, and sometimes I will use them in watching videos. But typically, this is a different kind of format. So the Zettelkasten has a lot of features that have to do with page numbers and so forth. And it's very, very good for books. And it is good for video courses, where the courses, the videos are a much shorter length. For something like this, I might take... I got surprised there. Rob has quite a big contribution here. Thank you so much for that. Wonderful. Really appreciate the support always. Epic support from Rob. Unbelievable, really. By the way, Rob designed the guts of Flyboy, so that was quite cool. And we'll see how Vitamin X goes. But if I get my wish, it's going to be a lot more elaborate than this one. But thank you so much for so much support over so long. Really appreciate it, and I'm humbled. So the whole thing is, Hamza, is that use the tool that is appropriate to the thing that you're doing. So if it's language learning, I'll use this particular tool, the card, in a particular way. But if it's taking notes from books or using cards as a reminder, I will do it in a particular way. Now, if you want to take key points like this and then mix and match them, then you can use the front and back of a card to have observations on one side and then whatever the other information is that you want to weave it together with on the other. But you could also use a memory palace just in your mind and have one point interact with another in a memory palace. So, you said bullet points in your research and any notes from books or podcasts. I would need a more specific example to really dial down on something. So if you have a specific example you care to share, let me know, because bullet points in your research and notes from books that you want to weave together, if I can work from specifics, I can just speak more specifically. By the way, this is a polymathic tip for you. A lot of people ask questions that are good, but they can be stronger by being specific. A lot of people, when they email me, they say, I'm sorry for writing such a long thing, or sorry for my very long post on the YouTube comments. No, and 1,000 times no. Do not ever apologize for writing at length. Even if it is truly annoying, don't apologize for it. Write at length. You're going to train your mind to consider things in a much deeper way. And if the person reading it doesn't like it, that's their problem. They're not a very good teacher, or they've got some sort of issue. Maybe they're a good teacher, but they've got some kind of issue that day. Let's say, really, really important. So keep that in mind. Be as specific as possible when you're asking questions, because you'll not only teach yourself much faster, because you'll observe what it is, the answer that you're looking for in the way that you describe the question, but you'll just have a much better answer at the end of the day because of nuance and detail. Someone today emailed me who's in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass about some very, very specific things about literary historic periods and how they're going to be put together in a memory palace, and the names Shakespeare were there, right? So that gives me more to work with in order to answer that question. Really important. Okay, so hello, Bill. Good to see you. And Davlavi, so good that you're here. I love seeing familiar names. Mark says, suggestions for Spanish learning. Yes. 26 memory palaces. In Spanish, you can have 27, one for the enya, but I don't think it's that necessary. But a minimum of 26 memory palaces. Then get together a bunch of words that you distribute alphabetically through them, 10 for each memory palace to learn the ropes of this particular approach. known as the magnetic Mary method for language learning. Then read, write, speak, and listen Spanish every single day as much as you can. And then as you build your vocabulary, make sure that you're memorizing words that you actually want to speak. So there'll be frequency lists that will say these are the words that are very, very important. I should say speak and that you want to understand. But you have a particular context. So it could be very, very frustrating to memorize a bunch of stuff that nobody ever uses and that you don't actually need. So this is where a lot of language learning is frustrating for people. So, you gotta get the stuff done that you actually need and worry about the sexy stuff later. So what am I talking about? Colors, days of the week, pronouns, and just household stuff, right? That you're going to come across. So, shui long tao in Mandarin it's a pretty cool word, but it means faucet, and it's just like you got to learn that stuff, right? You got to learn how to say faucet. By the way, that's water dragon head in English direct translation. And you got to make it exciting to yourself. And in Mandarin, there's quite a few words that are quite exciting. But you'll have words in Spanish like palabras or whatever, right? And it's just okay. How exciting is that? But you just got to memorize it anyway because it's a very, very important word. So get that stuff done, but always pay attention to what it is that's actually going to achieve your goal. Not, okay, so here's this frequency list. If it's your Hispanic coworkers, what do you want to talk about with them? What do they tend to talk about? And then learn the vocabulary and phrases around that. So if they're talking a lot about music, then which kind of music is it? Learn vocabulary and phrases around that kind of music so that you can talk about it. And I go to the music example because that's what helped me learn languages really, really quickly. Is I was in a band, and so it's just like, what music can I learn to talk about? And then I went and found interviews with musicians in that language, and I memorized a bunch of cool phrases that those musicians used, and it bound me much more closer to the people I was speaking with in German because they're like, where the heck did you come up with that? One that I remember, my grammar might have slipped a little bit. Unter dem Tisch gefallen, as they say in German. It fell under the table a little bit. But ich hab meinen Untergangssekt schön in Kühlschrank. I think that's right. Which means I already have my champagne for the end of the world in the fridge. But that came from reading an interview with a musician. And it's just like a kind of ironic way of saying, things probably can't get any worse than this, but if they do, I'm prepared. That sort of thing. So that's what I would suggest there. I hope that helps with language learning. But definitely make sure that you have familiarity with the magnetic Mary method if you're attracted to the mnemonic-powered stuff. But don't make it entirely about mnemonics. Make it about reading, writing, speaking, listening, and memorizing. That's called the big five of language learning. You can weave those things together in some really interesting ways so that you can do it daily. And language learning and how to do it is a polymathic skill set, or it will help you add a skill set that will make you more polymathic. Very, very important. Okay, so Jobin Master said, since you understand the academic path fully, you understand where it is good and where it is outdated. Do you still recommend university, specifically the humanities? Okay, thank you for that question. Let me think about that for a second and come back to that. Because I want also just let me put a pause here on the chat. Love interacting with you all. Keep the chats coming in, but I want to get through something more about the polymathic topic and the strategies today. And then I have some questions that people who can't be here put in, so I want to make sure I cover them. So they used the community tab, and I don't want to lose sight of those. But priorities are hard to make because everybody's important, right? What is it that in the Bosch novels? Hieronymus Bosch, it's the Michael Connelly novels, he often says everyone matters or no one matters, right? And I always love that. And apparently in some of the stories I remember, he had hold fast tattooed on his knuckles. HOLDFAST, hold fast. And then I think later in the stories he gets the tattoos removed. But anyway, everyone matters or no one matters. I'll never forget that. So it's always hard for me to prioritize because it's all important. Okay, so what I really wanted to get into is like, what are the traits of being a modern polymath? How are you going to deal with digital tools? Are they really going to accelerate your knowledge? A lot of people say that you should be reading books that are at least 100 years old as much as possible. And I agree with that to an extent. But I think you also got to be keeping your finger on the pulse of the new stuff, the new, and the new, right? So very, very, very important to have that balance, that mix. So one thing that you could do is interleave between books that are 100 years old, books that are 50 years old, and books that are 5 weeks old, and just keep rotating those, or 100 years old and older, something like that. And I generally do that with a fair amount of frequency and strategy behind it. But what about the technology? Well, one thing that I think is really, really important, and it's not talked about all that much, is yes, there are these AIs. But people seem to think that everything in the world has been scanned. Well, no, it hasn't. I don't know what the figure is anymore, but about 10 years ago, the figure was that about 15% of the world's books, printed material, was scanned and online. Is it much bigger than that now? Maybe it's doubled. But I don't think you're ever going to get all of the world's knowledge inside of the computer for a large language model to scan and interpret. And even if it did, there's going to be material that some people, or for at least the foreseeable future, there's going to be, people who are going to make books that are not going to be printed. Like this book I showed you earlier. This is not on the internet. And Rob and I closed the pages so that you'd have to cut it open in order to scan it. You would have to use that knife in the back of the book that we put here in order... the light is, you'd need this knife to open the book. But this is not, no AI knows what's in this book. Now, some people have said that actually, exponentially, it knows through recursion. So not only, they argue, will a ChatGPT be able to produce every book that was lost to history, but it will produce every book that never would have been written by a human. Like it would produce the books that would be written by chickens and fish and so forth. Now, I think if chickens and fish were to write books, it would write those books. I think there's a category confusion that's being made when they argue that, but I understand why they're saying that. But myself, I don't really care whether it scans everything and knows everything. That doesn't mean that you're going to get the benefit of it if you don't interact yourself with the actual material, the printed material, if that's what it takes. And there are different versions of printed books. So I'll give you a pretty key example. When I lived in Germany, I found a copy of 1984 from the DDR, which was, on the communist side or socialist side of the Berlin Wall. And it was a very, very different book. Also, I remember talking to a doctor who told me about how his math textbooks were. And they were filled with examples about how fast does a bomb travel from Eastern Europe to America to destroy capitalism? Just weird stuff like this, right? And those multiple versions of books, a text generator may not ever give you the granular details, the nuances of what has been physically produced in books because it has an agenda. It's been programmed to be kind, to be gentle, to be soft, to be positive, right? Well, unfortunately, think of Christopher Hitchens. Remember what he said his criticism of heaven was? He said, kneeling for all eternity is going to be really boring in worship, right? Because there's no criticism of anything. Nobody's squabbling about topics. There's no debates. We are in paradise now, right? It's just now, and the now. So in terms of the technology, by all means, use the technology. But get as involved as you can, not just in one version of a book, but in as many versions as possible. I showed you this earlier, but I also recently ordered the first version because I used to have the first version, but travel, I had to get rid of it and so forth. And I realized, wait a second, because I've been memorizing material from this book. I realized, this isn't the first version. I want the first version again. So I'm going to get the first version because the first version is just different. And history of versions is very, very important. We're losing this in the online world. Things are being removed. They're being deleted. They're being memory holed, etc. And that's not good. I mean, it's necessary, I think, because of the cost of electricity. But if you really want to be a 21st century polymath, you've got to realize that it's not all digital. And digital is not necessarily accelerating knowledge. Any world in which knowledge is being deleted to save energy or to promote agendas and all that sort of stuff, that's not accelerating knowledge. That's stagnating knowledge. That is knowledge that is in trouble, right? So keep that in mind. The other thing about the modern world to talk about, and that you want to prepare yourself for to be modern, is basically the gig economy, right? So a gig economy is going to challenge people who want to become polymaths, because, I mean, how can you serve so many clients if you're doing so many different things? You might just want to be really, really good at the thing that gets you the most clients so that you can enjoy being a polymath outside of the work that you're really, really good at. So I wanted to raise that point because you might think that polymathic efforts apply to your profession. Not necessarily. It could, right? But inside of a profession, there's a lot of sacrifice that's made. I make sacrifice, right? I'm interested in so many things. But in order to do memory, I have to do memory. And I have to do memory over and over and over again. Now, I do memory in a lot of different ways, but that is my discipline. And I don't just do other stuff, really. I mean, this novel, yes, it's a novel, but it's a novel about what? It's a novel about a detective learning the art of memory. And it teaches you the art of memory as you learn it. But most of what I do are books like one of my most recent books here, which is called The Memory Advantage. And for anyone who's interested, that's actually on special. And you can grab it at the link that I'll put in the chat. This is 52 weeks of memory exercise for you. And it is me doing the discipline of what I do. And a lot of people, their brains are not prepared to be focused enough to have phasic dopamine on demand all the time. So I needed to address that issue. How can we help more people do that? Well, we make sure to have more exercises for them. And the Memory Advantage has brain exercises interwoven with memory exercises. And you will learn in the Memory Advantage ways of using memory techniques that you haven't heard of before. I'm fairly confident. Happy to be corrected, because if you've seen it elsewhere, I want to know so I can read that source. But this is some really, really fantastic stuff. And you will take a scattered brain and you will give it direction. And it will be very, very strong. And you'll be able to do things a lot more like what I do, which is be super, super focused, but have time for your other interests. Because I play guitar 3 or 4 times a week. And I take on new challenges, and, I'm learning some Opeth songs right now, and that ain't easy stuff. And, I'm not perfect at it, and I'll probably never get perfect, but it stretches my brain, and I've gotten good enough that I can even try Opeth, because it's not easy at all. And the recent Dream Theater songs, I can play it fairly well, actually, the main riff of the recent Dream Theater song, and so I have time for these things. It's another skill, but the time to deal with other skills, to practice novels and not just nonfiction, the time to play music, the time to go to the gym, learning certain moves at the gym is another kind of skill. So I'm doing animal flow moves, and that's another skill. I have time to do that, but it's because I'm not in the gig economy as such, but in a way I am. My gig is memory. Memory, week after week after week after week, day after day after day, month after month, year after year, 15 years now. That has been the main thing, the teaching of memory, the research of memory, the creation of new and interesting or old but made new ways of everybody getting more exposure to the memory arts, right? That's what opens up all the other possibilities to explore those other techniques. So I hope that really helps. And if you want to grab the Memory Advantage, by all means, there's 52 weeks in there for you so that 2025 has a unique thing for you to practice each and every week. And you're going to learn the memory techniques, and you're going to practice them, and you're going to have quarterly reviews, and you're going to be able to just have an amazing adventure as a result. So consider getting that if you don't already have it. And I know some of you do, and I know that some of you have been sending me emails sharing your progress, which is absolutely fantastic. All right, so another thing to think about is, as a modern polymath, how are you going to use something that people have never had access to before, which is social media? And one of the skills that I'm working on developing this year is something that I've always just noodled around on, but never done strategically, which is LinkedIn. So if you go and find me on LinkedIn, you'll see I started a newsletter, and I'm practicing the practice of whatever it is that people do on LinkedIn to network successfully. And I'm pretty good at networking in person, but in terms of using that platform, not at all. And so it might not be LinkedIn for you, but what social media network could you try and really put in your chops in order to learn the networking skill in the social media sense? It might be Instagram, it might be YouTube, it might be whatever. But think of that as part of how you're going to have a skill, a polymathic skill, and how you're going to use that to support your ability to get life taken care of, and then have time to work on all the other skills that you want to develop. And, try to figure out how you're going to make it sustainable. So whatever it is that you're doing, always keep the maintenance in mind, the long game. So learn a little bit of game theory. And game theory in a sentence is figure out how to make games and play games in such a way that you want to continually play them again, that they're not a drag, right? And if they're a drag, then think about how you can change them so that they become a game that you continually want to play again and again and again. So Lugano says, thanks for offering the new book, The Memory Advantage. Can hardly wait to read it. Excellent. Thank you for your excitement, Lugana. I think you're really going to love it. And this is really, really important to continually invest in what it is that you do. I've made my investments for 2025, and it's always a little bit emotional and nerve-wracking and so forth. Am I going to get what I want out of this, or is it just going to be another damn thing that I never use, etc.? That's just the way that it is. But as I started this off, you got to make yourself overcome various fears. And there's things that I've had to face and go over that were very, very, very big fears last year. And I'm sure glad that I went into them, even though there's still a little bit of fear around them. But I'm not ready to announce it yet. But I think you guys are going to be amazed by what I have to announce, hopefully in the first quarter of this year, because, well, let me give you a little bit of a clue. Hugh of St. Victor had a physical memory palace that people came to visit, and he taught the art of memory with a memory palace on the wall behind him. So that's going to be, maybe that's too much of a clue. But in any case, this is going on. This is happening, and it's very scary. But away we go. Bill says he's on week 22 of the Memory Advantage. Great. Yes. And I really appreciate your updates about how things are going. Okay. So keep in mind that you want to have some kind of social media strategy. Learn it. Make it part of your polymathic skill set, but do it in such a way that it doesn't create a distraction. So how do you do that? Well, you can have, let's just take the case of LinkedIn. I have the LinkedIn hour. I check in then again later in the day. So my goal is to post 2 times daily. And so LinkedIn hour is usually like half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening. Keep it at that, right? Because it can be like anything, just suck you in, and then the next thing you know, 3 hours have gone by. In this case, it's just a lot of professional stuff, so that's cool. But whatever you do, just like have borders, frame it. And if you have to, set a timer. Really, really simple to do that. And in using and enabling yourself to network using these tools, as long as you use them as a tool and you don't use them as entertainment, and you don't use them as just giving yourself some variety or a dopamine spike, it can serve you incredibly well. And you'd better believe that the people who are being very, very successful, they are using it as a tool. They're not letting it create dopamine spikes that turn them into addicts, or very few of them are able to do that, because you just can't get ahead if that you're using it like a kind of ersatz alternative video game. Swipe, 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 swipe. Just swiping around and looking at other people's lives, that's like a video game. It's very boring, or maybe it's not boring to you, but it's kind of like a video game. You're just going through levels, right? Just stay away from that stuff. Use it intentionally. This is modern polymath behavior, right? And I would strongly encourage you, and this is like a pill that might be a little bit difficult to swallow, but if you can't start your own business, become an employee of somebody who is making a huge, huge adventure for themselves, so that you're as close to being an entrepreneur as possible. And this will give you lots and lots of additional freedoms and benefits. So, you can be an A person, a B person, a C person, or a D person, to keep it really, really simple. And this is a Dan Sullivan model. And basically what he says is the A person is the visionary entrepreneur. The B person is the person who supports the entrepreneur. And then a C person is maybe, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no shame in it at all. The person who just has sort of a pay-as-you-go job, paycheck coming in, paycheck going out, whatever. They're in the service industry or whatever. There's a lot of things that can be in the category of C, and they're very, very necessary and to be honored and cherished. Like, we just simply cannot live without our plumbers and builders and all kinds of roles. But the D type, and this is Dan Sullivan's model, is basically the bureaucrat, right? Who is got their nose in monitoring everything, and that's also needed to a certain extent. But generally, you got to pick your battles. Like, do you want to be in a category that is essentially surveying and directing how people behave, etc., as opposed to either being a visionary or supporting a visionary? So I would deeply consider that. Build a brand for yourself if you can, or support one that you really believe in. And it might seem too impossible, but it really isn't. There are entrepreneurs who are looking for someone who will go to town for them, go to bat for them. And they, as long as the deal works out, as long as it makes sense, as long as it's, something that's not going to create more friction for the visionary than the visionary is looking for, then it's really going to be a great thing to get yourself in that category. So look up Dan Sullivan for more information on that. But keep that in mind. It's part of how you're going to buy yourself time to build your polymathic skills. Okay, so you want to keep yourself relevant as well. So that kind of comes back to that thing, like balancing your 100-year-old books against your 50-year-old books and your books that are 5 weeks old, that you're keeping up with your reading. Keep yourself relevant. Know what's going on, but know what has come before. And, in terms of the question we had earlier about institutional support, would I still recommend, this is from Joby Master, would I still recommend university, specifically the humanities? Humanities I'm biased towards because I have a PhD in humanities. But I would go to university if it helps you in that general ABCD kind of structure. So if going to university helps you become a visionary that owns your own company, yes, go to university, whatever it is. If it helps you become the kind of person who can support a visionary, then yes, absolutely, go to university. Do you need to go to university to set yourself up as, let's say, a plumber? All right. I know a plumber, and he's polymathic in my mind, I don't know if he would call himself a polymath, but he knows the Hermetic tradition very, very well. He's sending me books all the time, and he knows Bruno, and he's just really deep into this stuff, and he has these multiple skills. And from what I understand, he chose that path because it's just really, really good for him. It buys him the time to do what it is that he likes to do, and he meets lots of interesting people. So do you need to go to university for that? Well, no, you probably need to go to trade school, get your certifications, keep ahead of your certifications, and so forth. And so in that case, if you really just want to have your bases covered in terms of, just being able to live to a particular degree, university is an investment that may never pay back ever, right? Because of how much it's come to cost. And so if it supports you, then do it. If not, not. But understand that when you take a loan to go to university, you are now an investor, and you're very close to an entrepreneur, because entrepreneurs invest in order to have cash flow later, right? Or as quickly as possible. So I would be thinking, if you're going into the academic path, that you are getting a job that's related to what you're doing already, publishing in that area as soon as possible, even as an undergrad, and that you are part of the university clubs that are related to your area, if any. If not, make one. Making your own club or organization is huge, because it'll be very, very difficult for people to not take you seriously in the school itself. You're going to get scholarships easier and so forth. How do I know? Well, I've seen it, I've observed it, but also when I was an undergrad at York University, I was president of the English Undergraduate Student Association. That helped me in many, many ways. Then when I was doing my MA, I was a research assistant, and I also was a research assistant to the head research librarian at York University. And, those things were exactly what I'm suggesting to you. It mitigated the investment. It made the investment better, right? It reduced any problems that are going to come out of having to take student loans and so forth, because those skill sets were not just, oh, this guy can read books and talk about them. I learned how to be a research librarian by being the research assistant of the head research librarian. And I'd worked in multiple libraries as well. But as much as possible, all my jobs in university always were connected to what I was doing in university. And I can't think of, the only one I can think of is that I mowed lawns, and I worked for a while in a removal company. And those were not the best choices, but they were needed at the time, and as soon as I could replace them, I did. Although I kept the lawn mowing thing because I just really liked the way I was doing it. Long story, but I met a lot of cool people that way. But in any case, I hope that helps answer the question about would I still recommend the university, specifically the humanities. I don't know what the humanities programs are like now, so I'd have to look at specific programs, Joby Master, but at the end of the day, I'm biased towards humanities, so you'd want to ask somebody who's not biased towards them. Okay, so Sujan is here, and he says, I want to know how I could remember all I read for my exam. Well, why do you have to remember all that you read? This is such an important point. There's a thing called Zipf's law. Zipf's law tells us that most of what we read is the word the. Then there's and, but, he, she, it, them, they. Why do you have to remember that? It does help to remember that Hamlet was a he. I'll give you that. But you already know that, right? So you don't have to memorize that. Really, really important. Extract the information that you need for your exam, which is usually a very, very small amount. Memorize it. Practice writing out summaries. Take practice exams and talk a lot with a lot of people about what you're learning. And then go talk to your professors. Make sure that you're on the right track. Get them involved. Literally, they're the ones that are going to grade you. And then go and take the exam and let go of the outcome. You're going to do great. And that might sound like an offhand answer, but that is the answer. There's more detail to how to memorize things, of course, and how to write effective summaries and how to extract the information from your notes. And that's what the magnetic memory method is all about. So I would encourage you to get more familiar with the ins and outs of all that. But you don't have to remember everything you read. It's just not the case. Okay, I want to get into some of the questions that were left previously. Jarrett Johnson is here, and he left a comment on the community tab, and he said, what's the website for the Brain Games? And Brain Games is a song that Christian Fitzharris and I put together, and there is a training program that is not open right now called the Brain Exercise Bootcamp, but at the moment, rather than the Brain Exercise Bootcamp, which I'm going to open in the future, I would suggest the Memory Advantage, which right now you can grab further up in the chat. There's a link to that. And so that is going to give you lots and lots of brain games. And later this will be built up in the Brain Exercise Bootcamp the next time I hold it. All right. Which is a live thing. So thank you for that question. KNW Seeker had asked, how do you add details after memorizing the main ideas? That's a great question. To memorize details after you've memorized main ideas, or to add details, you have lots and lots of options. One of the first options is just to actually notice, this connects to something that is related to the main idea. And then the next time you write a summary, write about that connection. Or if you're using particular things, like let's say you're using Giordano Bruno's statue technique, and you have established a statue for a main idea. Well, then you can just think back to that statue and connect the new idea to the statue that you have in your memory palace. In the book that I'm writing, I'm revising now, but I'm rewriting a substantial portion of it, The Infinite Memory Palace Technique of Giordano Bruno. There's a fair amount about statues in it. It's a short passage, but a fair amount about it because it connects it to all kinds of other things. But that's how you do it, basically, is you go into the memory palace where you originally established the main idea, and then you add something, you supplement the original image. And the more that image is established in a very, very strong way, then the easier it is going to be to connect or compound in the new thing. As usual, questions are a lot easier to answer if you have a specific main idea that you want to talk about. But, just one that comes to mind is, if memory serves, Napoleon is born in Corsica, then he dies in Longwood. So these are not necessarily concepts or main ideas, but having established Corsica as the date of birth, well, then the next idea is the death, right? So I don't need to have a separate area in the memory palace. We just add the image to the image that helps with the word Corsica. So I think I had like an apple core or something like that, and the apple was getting sick, Corsica. And then Longwood, if this is correct, I hope so, I just added a long piece of wood helping this apple that's getting sick, the apple core getting sick. So Corsica, Longwood, that sort of thing, right? So it's just supplementing, adding on, and so forth. And if you really study your memory techniques, you'll learn more about how to do this. But don't just study it. Actually, just start to use memory techniques without needing to know every little bit about it, so that you are able to just get going, hopping. And it's really, really important. Jagnish had said here, he said, I am kind of burned out after studying hard for a year now, and I'm unable to do anything you have. Any tips on going back to being productive again? I'm in burnout for a year. And then he asked about the 10,000 rule. How can I become expert in something? I have to put in 10,000 hours if I want to become a polymath, but then that's 10,000 hours for everything you want to have as your individual skill set as a polymath. I would love to be a polymath, but how can I become an expert in so many things? So burnout first. I would go back to what we talked about with Born to be Great and really learn how to set up phasic dopamine and maintain it so that you're just not getting burnt out in the first place. Now, I have been burnt out for a very, very long time, but I deal with it in precisely these ways. So it's not necessarily bad to be burned out. I think you can be burned out and still keep going. I'll just leave that. I'll just put that out there. Where burnout gets to be a problem is when it's affecting your decision making and so forth. And then that is when you're supported by a network, you have lots of people that you can speak with about various things, then you can be burned out and still do all right in the end, right? So I wouldn't run away from burnout. I think that we all get burned out. I think the entire world is burned out, really. And so getting rid of it just might not be an option. And I almost accept that as a reality. And then just how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to be burned out and just refresh ourselves anyway, right? And that might not be a satisfying answer, and you might prefer a more optimistic take. But I don't think optimism is worth anything if it doesn't have pessimism mixed in. And you may or may not know, but I'm a great reader of people like Schopenhauer, and he said things that I probably shouldn't repeat at all, ever. But nonetheless, I'm not as pessimistic as him, but I'm sure glad that I have exposure to his depths of pessimism, right? It's really, really, really powerful to just call a spade and just keep going, and build a life so that you can keep going no matter what happens. And that's really, really important. And so that's my sort of take on it. And I think too that a lot of burnout this is a stoic thing, right? That, the things that are happening in your mind are worse than the reality. And I think that's quite true, because if you keep thinking about, oh, I'm burnt out, well, you're just creating a feedback loop. And instead, if you would just say something more along the lines of, I will push through this exhaustion, or this exhaustion needs attention, or anything but I'm burned out, like as a mantra, something that's a little bit more positive, healing focused, and so forth. And you might fall off the wagon. I've fallen off the wagon. I've deliberately fallen off the wagon in order to better write a character, Flyboy. And also, I just wanted to experiment. What would happen if I did a reverse Victorious Mind effect? That's kind of dumb, actually. But Flyboy came out of it, and I think Flyboy is more authentic as a result. Okay, Born to Be Great said, would you recommend reading Flyboy first before starting the 52-week exercises? I really don't know the answer to that. I would just say that the exercises are really quite short, so it doesn't have to be one or the other. And you might actually find more benefit by reading them both at the same time. And so if you, I can't give too many details about it, but there's a particular chapter structure in Flyboy that would allow you to actually read it in such a way that you could read it in 52 weeks along with each exercise. And I'd be very curious what would happen if you did that. Okay, I want to get to the other questions that were left on the chat. Oh, sorry, about the 10,000 hours thing. This is really important. So do a calculation and figure out how long 10,000 hours really is. Is it 46.5 days? Does it take 27 years? What is it? I mean, you can calculate it in all kinds of different ways, but get a more realistic, substantial understanding of what it is, right? And then put it out of your mind, because not everybody agrees with the 10,000 hour rule. It's one of those ideas that goes viral. Nobody questions it because it's a shortcut. It's a heuristic. The mind is lazy and it's just like, oh, 10,000 hours. And then later, some people start poking holes in it, and you find out that it's actually not really true. Or at least in many cases, it's not true. So you can become an expert in all kinds of things without spending 10,000 hours in it. But what's an expert, right? Try to be careful around this. A polymath is not necessarily an expert. Having mastery is not expertise necessarily. Mastery is practicing continually the skill and accomplishing goals with it. You don't have to accomplish them expertly every single time, right? This is just not the case, right? A polymath is someone who has many abilities. And you don't have to have 10,000 hours behind each and every one of them. However, that said, if you were, Vignesh, to structure your life in such a way that you picked 2 to 3 skills that you really want to work on, and then you work daily on them, well, 365 hours at the end of a year is massive. It is massive. But you can compound that through some of the visualization that we were talking about. So if you, like in music, for example, when I went on tour with The Outside and other musical experiences that I've had, going to the studio to record, for example, I didn't have time to practice music all day long, and it's not good anyway. You don't need it. But I visualized a lot. So I managed to get in extra practice by before going to bed, going through the songs, figuring out where my fingers were, etc. And you can do that too. You can get more hours out of it. The other thing with memory practice, right, is a lot of people think, well, how am I going to fit in all my memory practice? Well, you don't have to always just sit there and be in a chair. Okay, so this poem goes like this, right? No, you can actually do it while you're walking to take out the trash. You can do it while you can recite things that you're memorizing or you have memorized and you're getting into long-term memory while you're washing the dishes. There's a video of me on the channel somewhere where I'm singing Ni wen wo ai ni o dua shen wo ai ni ao chi fen, and I'm practicing washing the dishes. I'm singing while washing the dishes. Now, from a video production perspective, that wasn't that great because you can't really hear my voice singing that well because it's like bang, bang, bang with the dishes and the water. But I was just doing it to practice. And that helped me remember the song, right? And so when I'm walking around and I go to the gym or I go to the beach or go to read outside, whatever I'm doing, I'll be walking and I will think, awkward grammar appalls a craftsman, a data bard as daft as Zara, damns stagnant art, and scrawls an alpha, a slapdash arc and a backward slash that mars all stanzas and jams all ballads. What a scandal! And, I'll just be practicing a thing that I'm memorizing. It's so much fun. So you can do two things at once. You can chew bubblegum and walk. So the hours build up. The hours build up. And, not everything's like that. I can't. Well, actually, I can. In one of my books that I haven't finished yet, that I hope to release soon, I talk about this thing I did with my friend Adam called the mobile busking unit. And we used to have these guitars that we would walk around Toronto with, and we would sing these songs. And we'd be singing while we're walking. And no one could ever hear what we were saying or give us money because it was the mobile busking unit. Got in lots of practice. And then later we did sit-down performances and so forth. But we were much better at the sit-down performances because we would practice while walking. We would go through hotel lobbies and stuff like this, and it was just wild fun. But that's walking and practicing music. So you can consider that. In any case, I don't think 10,000 hours is that long. I don't think it's a particularly correct number to put in your mind. And even if you do 10,000 hours, you can compound things in such a way that you'll be able to get the most out of it. Interleaving also will give you memory effects from the memory perspective. So switch between your topics in the way that we talked about earlier, which is, if I'm reading, I'm not going to push, I'm not going to force myself to read longer when I'm getting tired and bored of a book. I'll put that book down and pick up the next one, right? Stretch a little, go to a different topic. That's called interleaving. Very, very powerful. Okay, Tame She-Wolf had asked, how have you cultivated your zest for life? With great effort. Thanks for asking about that. She-Wolf, that makes me think of the Megadeth song. So you craft it, you cultivate it. That's the right word. How have you cultivated your zest for life? You cultivate it. I think the key things are really what we've talked about. Daily journaling, having a vision statement. These are things I've rejected. I was so dumb. And you know what was so dumb about rejecting the kind of like self-help world suggestions of having a vision statement, daily journaling, and so forth? When I went to do my PhD, they made me write a vision statement. It just wasn't called a vision statement. It was a project description or a research proposal, but there's a vision statement. What is it you're going to do? What are the parts? How's it all going to work? What are the resources and so forth? It's not self-help at all. It's just common sense. In the PhD world, why are they going to give you a budget, because you get paid in the program that I was in, if you don't have clarity about what it is that you're going to do? So you cultivate what it is you're going to do. And if your goal is to have zest for life, or lust for life, as the great song goes, lust for life, then, what does that look like? What is it that you want? What is it going to be like when you have it? And then build it, right? And that's literally what I've done, and I encourage others to do. And then you'll lose it every once in a while. You'll fall on your ass, and and you got to get back up, and then you just got to do the exercise over and over and over again. It's the Zig Ziglar thing, right? It's just why do we recommend self-help stuff every day. Well, it's because it's like a shower, right? You shower every day because you get dirty, you stink. In meditation, there's often the metaphor or the image of polishing a bowl. You meditate every day because your consciousness gets dirt and grime on it. And if you don't polish it, it's going to get not only dirt on it, it's going to get rusty. So you polish every day. That's why you meditate every day. You cultivate the shining nature of your consciousness. All right. So Casey said, I think I've read about a different view on the number of hours, and classical musicians were the greats didn't practice more in quantity, but rather they practiced the hard stuff the most. Casey, that's a great point. So in music, there's a principle called dedicated practice. Maybe it's called different things by different people. If Rob's still here, he might know. But one of the things that I learned, and I wish that I had learned it so much sooner, is, yes, you practice the difficult parts in music, but you practice in a particular way. So one thing that I learned to do is if you get tripped up by a particular bar, you loop that bar. Because I used to like go back to the beginning of the song and think, okay, I'm not going to mess it up this time. Oh, no. You get that bar and you just loop it until that you get it. Then you get the bar and the bar after it. Then you loop those two bars until you get it. Then you do the bar before and then the bar, troublesome bar. And then you do that. And then you loop all three. Then you go back to the beginning of the song. And then next thing you know, it's in your procedural memory and you get it right. You just really break it down to its component parts. It's called in memory science chunking. Same thing with phrases. When you're memorizing difficult phrases in languages that you find hard to say, I break it down all the time. So I'll give you an example like Turtva, Moharnavam, Hatva, Ragadveshti, Rakshashan, Yoga, Shantasanta, Yuktatma, Ramo, Vrajate. In Sanskrit, that means those who kill the like-dislike monster arrive at the sea of tranquility. Right? And this is really, really important. Deliberate practice, I think, Rob, is a different thing. Dedicated practice, well, at least dedicated practice is how I heard it in music. But deliberate practice has a whole, I have a whole blog post on deliberate practice. It's a little bit different than dedicated practice. I think the term dedicated practice is because you're dedicating to the specific unit. You've chunked it down to that dedicated unit. Okay, so in terms of that phrase in Sanskrit, those who kill the like-dislike monster arrive at the ocean of tranquility, or they pass through the sea of delusion and arrive at the, I'm not a Sanskrit translator, but whatever, you get to a good place because you kill the like-dislike monster. This is a very difficult phrase. Turtva, Moharnavam, Hatva, Ragadveshti, Rakshashan, Yoga, Shantasanta, Yuktatma, Virajate. Ramo, Virajate. So there, I got it right the first time, then I messed it up the second time. Normal. To break that down, to do dedicated practice of a particular thing, let's say it's Ragadveshti, Rakshashan, then Ragadveshti, Rakshashan, Yoga. That sort of thing. And then what's before Ragadveshti, Rakshashan? Hatva. Sorry, it's Hatva. Turtva, and then Hatva. Hatva, Ragadveshti, Rakshashan, Yoga, Shantasanta, Yuktatma. And, you just go back and forth, very in a dedicated manner, picking out little parts. Same thing happens when I memorize things. So there's a thing I'm memorizing right now, which is writing is inhibiting. Sighing I sit, scribbling in ink this pigeon script. I sing with nihilistic witticism, disciplining signs with trifling gimmicks. Impish hijinks which highlight stick sigils. Isn't it glib? Isn't it chic? I fit childish insights within rigid limits, writing shtick which might instill priggish misgivings in critics blind with hindsight. I dismiss nitpicking criticism which flirts with Philistinism. I bitch, I kibitz. Griping whilst criticizing dimwits, sniping whilst indicting nitwits, dismissing simplistic thinking while philippic wit is still illicit. I may have made a mistake there, but the thing that I was thinking of is that I kept missing the word might. So I had to break it down. I had to do this dedicated part to just work with the might. Anyway, I think that's the first time I've recited that whole thing out loud, and I might have missed a part, but wow, I really like that. It's fun. Okay, so that's part of why you can actually learn things a lot faster, is if you just chunk it down to the central element and focus very, very, very tightly on the problem part. Okay, so let's see here. Get into the chat. Michael had said that the system's really helping him. Wonderful to hear that, and great to see you, Michael. I really appreciate it. I have a picture of you, I believe, with Flyboy, if this is the Michael Wild I'm thinking of. The Oz91 says, I'm now currently thinking of how to implement polymath principles to skills-based stuff. I'm thinking noting down theory and writing, doing it, testing it, and then journaling the progress. Please do. You say, I am weird that I tend to think myself to sleep. Therefore, visualizing while lulling myself to bed could be a skill that I can really take advantage of. Oh, yeah, I do so much while I'm laying there. So much of my Sanskrit practice, I really got that stuff into long-term memory while laying in bed. Helped me go to sleep. Casey said, oh, yeah, we got that one. Crowan, thanks for being here. Says, I've seen you speak about remembering many times, but what about forgetting? Can you actively forget things? How do you clean a memory palace? Okay, those are two different things. Thanks for asking about that. The reality is that I don't generally recommend forgetting. Why? Why would you want to forget things when, if the problem is that you're harmed by the memory? Like, I used to have this all the time. I used to think about a particular home where I had some bad stuff, and then I'd feel this sting, and I'd be like, oh, I wish I could forget about that. I wish that recurring memory would not come up again and again and again. But I don't want to train my memory to forget. I want to train my memory to remember. That's the goal. So then we shift the goal, and we make the goal, how do you remember things without being bothered by them? That's a much more mature approach. So you take the sting out of it. And what I did for that particular memory is I used it as a memory palace, and I memorized a particular piece called the Nirvana Shatakam, which is all about negation. So it goes like, Mano Bu Jahankara Chitani Naham. And that literally means I'm not my mind, I'm not my memory. And so it's making this distance. Anyway, by the time I was done, I could think about the horrible things that happened in that house without the sting at all. In terms of cleaning a memory palace, Alex Mullen talks about leaving them fallow. If you don't know him, he's 3 times world memory champion and medical professional extraordinaire, very, very, very talented mnemonist. And he talks about just leaving them empty. And that's totally valid. What I used to do is I used to imagine Mickey Mouse in Fantasia with the brooms. If you remember those brooms that go crazy and they're mopping like crazy and all that, I would get them to clean a memory palace. But I found that it's just a giant waste of time because there's so many memory palaces out there. Why not just make new memory palaces and then you can leave them fallow or just never use them again? So your mileage may differ, but that's for me. I don't clean memory palaces anymore at all. Also, the memory palaces that I do reuse for practice, like card practice, I just use them over and over and over again because unless I want to memorize the stack for the long term, there's no need to actually sit there and clean it out. Just pretend that the other stuff isn't there. Now, some people will get ghosting, but I found that if my intention is to practice memorizing cards and I'm not going to remember the stack after I've tested it, then forget about it. I mean, just use it again immediately and it won't interfere. So that's an important thing. Lugano asks, is that similar to the Leitner space system? So like really dedicated practice. Well, I think it is in a certain sense, but the Leitner space system is literally having information on cards that you're exposing yourself on a kind of loose algorithm, a self-directed algorithm as you proceed your cards through segments and boxes. So it's not exactly like that, but it relates to it, that's for sure. But how much it relates to the point that we would call it similar, I don't know. Michael Watt says, yes, it is. Michael, good to see you. Thanks for being with us. Carolina asks, is there a way to memorize the music sheet? I can memorize with my fingers, but not the sheet music. I don't want to try to reinvent the wheel with this. Carolina, yes, and I would suggest that you look at the 3 videos on music in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass. It's, let's call a spade a spade. It takes a little bit of a setup. You're going to need 5 mnemonic systems in order to make it work, but yes, you can do it. There are people who have taken it that are musicians who have that exact goal that you have, and they have said, Mamma mia, this is fantastic. But it is, it's 3 videos in the FAQ section, but those videos assume that you have the Magnetic Memory Method under your belt. All right, Mariana is here, says, I recently discovered your channel. It's been really helpful. I am currently trying to implement some of the memory techniques to help me prepare for the bar exam. Thanks for everything. Well, thank you. And the bar, I've had quite a few people go through the masterclass and pass the bar, and they were delighted, especially because they were also able to study languages at the same time, which was great, and amongst other things. Okay, so what about this 10,000 hour rule stuff and more about time management? Got some more comments that were left on the community tab, and I will get to those. But when it comes to time management, one of the things that I suggest that you get into is proscriptive scheduling. So rather than having a to-do list as such, write down your beginning and end times of what you do when you did it. So I do this not all the time, but when I start to find myself being less disciplined, then I start to do it again. And literally it's very simple. 9 o'clock, email. And then when email ends, 9:15. Then 9:15, reading, whatever. And then say it's 9:45 or whatever. Then so 9:45, working on Vitamin X, the sequel to Ye Olde Flyboy. Yes, I know you don't say Ye Olde, you don't pronounce it that way, but it's fun to do. And I write it down. Then here's the magic. At the end of the day, you're like, you're not like saying, where did all that time go? It's right there. And you train your brain to be on target, on task. And you know what time things are happening. So it's a very different way of thinking about things, but it will train your brain incredibly to do a lot more and stop forgetting to be on task. And you'll just also have this sense of accomplishment every day without a leaderboard in an app, without little ding, ding, ding or bells and whistles, which, if that's what you need, then okay. But I would train yourself to be reliant, to give yourself your own dopamine spikes. Hot damn, look at all this stuff that I did today. And because you did it in your own hand, it's so much more personal and it gets so much more into your brain and memory. So time management like that is incredible. And I would strongly encourage, to explore Pomodoro techniques and all that sort of stuff. I can't stand Pomodoro, and I'll tell you why. I don't want to train my brain to be interrupted. I just want to be into things, and then I want to know intuitively when it's time to stop and switch. So I don't do any of that sort of stuff. Now, in terms of prioritization, would you like me to give you one of my most favorite and personally most powerful exercises for prioritization? If so, give me a hell yeah in the chat, and we'll talk about one of the most powerful prioritization techniques that I know of. And I don't think that I've never heard of it before. It just came to me at one point. It has to do with geometrical memory palaces. I think you'll really love it. But let me hear like some really loud hell yes in the chat that you want to know about this prioritization technique. It will leverage so much, I believe, for most people. And it'll help you avoid burnout or deal with burnout. I mean, one of the most effective rest strategies is to lean into what's going on, gradually build support systems, and gradually make sure you're working on your fitness, making sure you're working on your rest, making sure you're working on your diet, making sure you're getting, if meditation is right for you, getting lots of meditation. I would recommend memory-based meditation and, doing things like going through a program like the 52 weeks of the Memory Advantage. I don't think anyone would ever regret going through even 10% of this, showing up every week, doing the quarterly reviews that are in there. It's really going to heal your brain. So give that a consideration. All right, we got some people who are interested in the this exercise for prioritization. So what you're going to do is close your eyes when it's safe to do it. And if it's safe to do it, you can do it right now. And Legend of Zelda? You have the Triforce, this triangle. This must be part of where I got it, because I used to love Legend of Zelda, and you're filling in the thing. Well, just imagine above your head or in front of your head. I do it above my head, but you have a Triforce or you have a triangle, pyramid. And, this is nothing mystical or magical, or it's nothing like that. By the way, in the Giordano Bruno book that I'm writing, one of the things that kept coming up in my research and my reading of Bruno is how that he went to pains to say there's nothing magical about this, there's nothing superstitious about this, and he's like really trying to talk about how it's the science of your mind. Please don't burn me at the stake. They wind up burning him at the stake anyway, but he talked about over and over again how this is not magic. It really isn't. It's just using your imagination. And back in Bruno's time, imagination was memory. So, triangle. And I would strongly suggest that you do this exercise as a triangle for the polymathic process that we're talking about today, the strategy. Because if you could do a dodecahedron, you could do it, but then you're just doing too much, right? This is called the priority pyramid. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the top 3 things that you absolutely want to smash, you want to realize. So maybe it's learning a language, and maybe it's writing a book, and maybe it's starting a new business, right? And you're going to just pick one and put it at the top. So if it's language learning, that's at the top of the pyramid. And then you have starting a business and writing a book. And then just rotate them around. Really focus on what it's like as each position is at the top of the pyramid. And just get a feeling for it. And, I'm assuming that for you, like me, the top of the pyramid will be the top priority, right? But you might experience it differently. It might be that the bottom left angle is the one that's the most priority, or the right, whatever it is, right? Just get a feeling for it. And think, okay, so language learning, no, I think I better be building that business, because if I build the business and it succeeds, I'll have more time for language learning, right? So that might be more of the priority than the writing the book. And then you go, well, wait a second. I could have a business that works a lot better if I finish the book. Anyway, just do this, and you'll reveal to yourself some pretty obvious things. You may even reveal, this doesn't belong in my priority pyramid at all. I'm not going to get the Triforce if I keep playing video games in my in my Triforce. Now, I'm not putting shade on playing video games. By all means, that has a place in the world. I don't play them myself, but I have at various points in my life, and I'm using a video game metaphor as we speak. What I do for entertainment sometimes is just watch video game playthroughs. I like the speedrunning videos, but I'm partly studying. Almost everything I do has to do with memory. I'm partly studying the speedruns because it's like, how do they remember this stuff? And one of these days I hope to interview one of them, if I find one where I think that they may have some sort of memory technique they use. Because it's fascinating to me how you memorize a game, every little move on every level, in order to do the speedruns. But beyond that, if I didn't have some sort of memory angle, I would think it was kind of a waste of time to watch other people play video games. Anyway, I have my temptations around video games. I often think about getting the arcade. We saw at a store recently Street Fighter as the arcade box, and I was just like, oh man, it took a fair amount of discipline to not buy that. Maybe in the future though. The Oz 91 says interview Carl Jobst. Okay, I will look into that. Thank you, or I'll try to look into that. I may put that in my priority pyramid and think, oh well, speedrunning is not the thing yet. But I didn't know that there was a person in Australia doing speedrunning videos. In any case, that's the exercise, and do it frequently. Do it once a week or more, and really get a feeling for what's going to be the priority. And then you can do it daily, right? And pretty much, rather than, doing time blocking and writing out all this stuff and like super plan on paper, I prefer to do my paper journaling just about other stuff, gratitude journaling, doing the vision and so forth. And then just thinking, what's the top priority? And I just take the 3 things and move them around. And then in terms of lifestyle design, if you develop a particular life, one of the things that I recommend, and it may be too bland and boring for some people, but just do the same things over and over and over again. It's kind of like that, I don't know if it's a myth or not, but the idea that people like Einstein wore the same clothes over and over and over again. Well, it just gives you so much more freedom to think if you just always wear the same clothes over and over and over again, which I've adopted quite a bit. I don't entirely wear the same clothes over and over again, but pretty much that's what I do. And I don't ever think about what I'm going to wear. It's just like, okay, this is what I wear for live stream and video. Boom, it's on. And then in my closet, well, I just take the shirt on the top. And that's it. Like there's never any variation. Shirt on the top. There, away we go. So a lot of mental energy is saved that way. And then you can spend more time on sitting, making triangles in your head, and figuring out the priority. So I hope you enjoy working with that. And that's a huge thing for time management. Another thing about time management is managing your energy. So rather than worrying about managing time all the time, manage your energy, and a lot of time will disappear. I often talk about how I don't believe time exists. And obviously I have to talk about time. It's in our language and so forth. But why I say I don't believe time exists is because I have evidence of things that when you really poke into them aren't really time, right? So we've already talked about that a little bit today. We've talked about how various people organize their week, and then, by the time the weekend comes, then everything falls apart, right? Well, why accept that there is such a thing as weekend? I just deny that there's a thing called the weekend. I just don't have it as part of my life. Other people do. I see evidence that they do, but that doesn't mean I have to accept that the weekend exists. When I lived in New York, I was never so bored in my life. I mean, I used to say all the time, for the city that never sleeps, it's closed down a lot of the time. Like things weren't open until 11 in the morning. It's like, what? Like I was ready to go. And it was just a ghost town at that time. And it was, to be fair, it was a weird time. It was still not that long after 9/11. So things were weird. But I was a little frustrated there because other people were recognizing time in a way that I just simply did not. And that comes down to energy management. So now I've learned to not be so frustrated. And this is kind of an Eckhart Tolle thing. But, rather than being frustrated when you have to wait, just think, like, what is this energy waiting? And get comfortable with it. Change it, shift it, transform it into something else. And then think something else. And this is where, for me, memorizing the Sanskrit was huge, because it could be everything from, instead of griping inside of myself, satanama, just a very simple Sanskrit thing with the mudras, or something more elaborate like that Tirtva Moharnavam thing that I recited before, or whatever. Like I've got so much Sanskrit now, it's not even funny. Or a poem, or whatever, a song. Very, very, very powerful to manage your energy instead of time, because time is actually in the minds of others, and it doesn't always have to be in your mind. And this also dovetails back to how do you manage burnout? Well, when you're feeling burnt out, what can you do in the moment to have that feeling, but somehow deal with it and essentially delegate it? Delegate it to some other strategy inside of you. So taking a deep breath, doing some breathing exercises, lots of breathing exercises. In one of my books that is almost done, I have a whole new set of breathing exercises, but there's also the original set of breathing exercises in The Victorious Mind. So if you haven't read that, that is on Amazon for you. So I guess there's more to say about time management, but one of the tools that you have access to is in the Memory Advantage, which has quarterly reviews. And so that will help you do a certain kind of practice of managing time just by doing the exercises of the quarterly reviews that are in the Memory Advantage. This is 52 memory exercises with various brain exercises interspersed, so you have variety, and you also have this quarterly review that's going to help change how you think about time. So grab that while it's on special if you like, and let me repost the link for you because it's gotten lost up in the chat so that you don't miss it. All right, let me get back to some of the questions that were posted on the community tab. Shelley had asked, what are the 3 to 5 fundamental sets you'd recommend for first-time Memory Palace builders? And she says, to me, ideally a set would have a baked-in reward and inherently require frequent recall and be linked to character development goals and or help with a procedural implicit memory task process. My first thought was a daily routine But I've recently found that routines for me tend to get amended and adjusted, and I'm avoiding long lists of goals these days. Suggestions are welcomed, and there's some more sentences there. So the first thing is to have memory palaces. So your first set is to have memory palaces, and I would suggest that you bite the bullet and get all 26 alphabetical memory palaces built like today. Just sketch them out. You don't maybe have to do all of them today, but when I do a new series, it usually takes me about half an hour or something like that. And all I'm doing is making very simple sketches like this. It's not art, it's just chicken scratches, and bang presto, new memory palace. That's it. And that one's an M memory palace, for example. Very fond memories. You just start A, B, C. You don't have to do A, B, C in that order. You can go A, C, E, or you can go Z, Y, X, W, V, U, T, S, R, Q, whatever. Like you can go backwards, forwards, all those sorts of things. But just get it done. That would be the first set. Then the other set is pick what you're going to memorize and memorize something that's actually worth memorizing. A lot of people futz around with things like the question here very, very specifically says a set would have a baked-in reward. Well, memorizing a shopping list is probably not going to be a reward. When you can just write down your shopping list, I mean, I don't see any problem with writing down a shopping list. If I'm memorizing Sanskrit, that's going to make me feel blissful, and then it's like, okay, yeah, well, I could use my memory techniques to write. No, the rewards they pale in comparison. Or make your shopping list in a language you want to learn, something that has a higher boost, a higher reward. So pick something. Maybe use the priority pyramid to think, okay, so what could I memorize? Would it be a language like Spanish or whatever versus memorizing some Shakespeare so that I can become a professional actor? Or would it be, I don't know, like a hazmat test, which I know some people are here today that have either done it. Michael, I believe, did a hazmat. It's just something to really, really consider. Jarrett was also, I believe, asking about hazmat stuff. Make that a priority. And remember always that there's boring stuff to memorize, but the magnetic memory method makes it exciting. So, I was talking earlier about today, like how I had to memorize faucet in Mandarin. Like you just have to know the word if you're going to know Mandarin, at least as well as I've come to know it. It's just a word that exists and you got to learn it. There's nothing exciting about faucet. There's nothing exciting about toilet paper, but you got to learn these words, right? So really, really work out what it is that has the priority, and, the priority for knowing those words is actually sooner than you think. So work those out. And that's basically my answer to that. 3 to 5 fundamental sets. The third one would be recall rehearsal. Make sure you understand recall rehearsal. Make sure that you're actually using recall rehearsal. Recall rehearsal is the thing. The point of the memory palace is to make recall rehearsal or spaced repetition actually work faster and better. It is not Sherlock Holmes stuff. I don't want to go into my mind palace and be like, okay, so no, I just want to know the stuff. And that is memory palace plus a worthy learning goal plus recall rehearsal to get it into long-term memory. That is the key. All right. Booklish 411 asks, do you believe anyone can equally truly achieve what they hope to if they try? And the answer to that, Booklish 411, great question, is no, I do not believe things. What I take to be true is what we have evidence for. So anyone is a very, very problematic word for me. What would that mean, right? Anyone. There is no one who is able to achieve anything on their own, right? So the people who can truly achieve what they hope to, if they try, it's Yoda 101. There is no try, right? What we need is to have goals, and then we need to build systems, and then we need to follow them in such a way that we have resources and that we know what the resources are, and we remember to call upon the resources. And if we don't have the resources, then our goal is to get the resources, right? And you have to sometimes have different goals. You have to be willing. And some people are just not willing to have different goals. But you have to. I mean, I have goals that I just have to let go of. I've wanted to be in the film industry, but I had to let go of that or pursue a different path because it just was not going to happen the way that I was going to enjoy my life, right? So, yeah, if I try, right? But at the end of the day, I wasn't going to try because there is so much politics. There's so many grimy, dirty, nasty things. And I experienced enough of it quickly enough to realize that's not my world, right? I just didn't want to do it. So now the goal changes to something else. And, sneakily, there's still like a little bit of the dream, which is maybe one day someone will read Flyboy and be like, holy cow, we should turn this into a movie. And then they buy the rights and maybe they get me to be a story consultant because I happen to have story consultant credits in my past. Like literally I have that on IMDb and in the credits of a movie. So, I could be the most likely person to hire, but I'm not going to make it a goal. I'm not going to hope about it. I'm not going to try to do it. It's just maybe something nice that would happen. So no, I don't even believe that I could get Flyboy made into a movie. I think that there's just, for me, too many things involved in it that I just don't want to do. So why force myself to do it when there's so much power in doing the things that I will do? So that's a good question. Do you believe anyone can equally truly achieve what they hope to if they try? I think that I would just completely reframe that question. And what I would say is, what is the evidence that people who accomplish things produce that we can analyze in order to tell the radically true story of how things happened? Then do we want those things? Because chances are the answer is no, we do not want their journey. And then we think more about what is our journey? What is the status quo of my life? What is the existing competence that I have right now that I could work with, manipulate, change, shift? This is exactly what people used to call magic, right? And it's not magic at all. It's really just the difference between actuality and potential, and then taking the actual and figuring out what are the potentials that you can work with and chart and weave and make things happen that are true to your existing competence. And the existing competence principle I talk more about in The Victorious Mind, which I think you'll find very, very useful in the context of the entire book. But at the end of the day, existing competence is something that so many people miss when they set goals. They set dreams and hopes and blah, 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 that is just never going to happen. There are people who want to develop certain physiques when they have ectomorphic bodies. You're not going to become an endomorphic physique if you're ectomorphic. It's just not going to happen. So you have to make a better goal. And there are some people who will say, oh, yes, you could achieve whatever you want. And and they are confusing categories. So, keep that in mind. And I appreciate that question very much. But I only look at evidence and I try to never believe. Why believe? If things are true, you don't have to believe in them. Very simple. And it's a very freeing logic. You might use the word believe in common parlance, but you don't have to actually believe in anything. There is nothing to believe in. There's actually a great song by Nevermore called Believe in Nothing. I really like that song. It's not really talking about this topic, but in any case, check it out if you like songs. Solomon Wrights asked, how did you manage your schedule as a master student of English language and working to take care of yourself? Well, Solomon Wrights, thanks for that. And the reality is that in parts of my university career, I didn't manage it very well. But because because as an undergrad, I was the president of the English Undergraduate Student Association at York University, I had an office when I was an undergrad. And so part of how I managed my schedule was I slept in the office, and sometimes I would stay overnight on campus. And that gave me a heads up because I had a very long commute from East York in Toronto up to York University, but then that would cut off a lot of time. The problem was that there wasn't very good breakfast options at the university, so I would eat quite poorly. And it's a kind of a longer answer, but the truth of it is that I didn't take care of myself, and as a result, I got into a lot of trouble. And it wasn't until really after I finished my PhD that I started to take care of myself. Now, the bright side of all that is I had memory techniques, and memory techniques can work even when you're incredibly unhealthy. And, I still suffer now because of a lot of the ways that I lived, and the memory techniques still work quite well. But when I have good days, the memory techniques work even better. So I don't spend time with regret and wishing things were different, but I am paying a price like you wouldn't believe. And young people won't believe it, because I heard other people when I was young who were talked about the price that they're paying for the way they lived, and I didn't believe it then. And I should have looked at the evidence. I should have been smarter, but I wasn't. And this is why old warriors like me are just filled with fire and passion to talk to anybody who will listen. When you've found better, it's like, wake up, bang, 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 knock on the door, because if you don't change things as quickly as possible, you have no idea what misery you can wind up in. So Solomon writes, the answer is that I didn't manage my schedule or my life very well at all. That said, there was a lot of my schedule I didn't have to manage, right? So what do I mean? The semester works in such a way that Friday morning at 8 a.m. was film and literature with Professor Nikita Larry. I remember that. He insisted that it would be on Friday morning at 8 a.m. It's a good time, actually, but it was a bad time for a lot of people. In any case, that's scheduled for me. My shift at Para Paints, when I worked in the paint warehouse, was 3:30 p.m. until midnight, and then Wilson, the foreman, he would sometimes be like, you got time, you got energy, can you do some overtime? And I'd just be thinking about my student loans and be like, yes. And so, it was managed for me. Now, that was a bad decision in many ways, because then I was not well rested the next day, and I had these long commutes, like I said. So that led to sleeping on desks, which is not very good for quality of sleep. But it was the time was scheduled for me. And I think that a lot of people could really just lean more on how time is scheduled for you in many contexts. Now, in terms of what I would do very positively to manage my time, is I would get on the phone sometimes and ask, because back then email was still not used that often, and I would ask the department secretary, when is the syllabus ready, or the syllabi? And I would get the syllabi as quickly as I could, and I would figure out what the readings were, and I would start reading in the summer before the semester started. And typically I would have a huge percentage of everything already read before the semester even started. And I would do that because I would work in the summer, and I would work and read, work and read, work and read. And I would go to movies and all that sort of stuff. But I was also, doing film studies kind of stuff. So, that's cheating. But I would go to the family parties and hang out with friends and yada, yada, yada. I was okay that way. But I work and read. And I would read during lunch hour. And I would take my notes on my little index cards. And I was ready to go. And then, as soon as the assignments were announced, if I couldn't get the assignments early, as soon as they were announced, I would start writing them. So sometimes I handed my assignments in early. If the professors would accept them, then I would have a chance to correct anything before the final assignment was due and get a better grade, right? So it is stuff like that really anybody can do. And you just got to be willing to do it. And you got to put the video games aside. And, to be fair, back then, YouTube wasn't even a thing until I was in grad school. And then it wasn't even enough of a thing to be much of a distraction. I remember I had a MySpace page, and that was a bit of a distraction, but not really, because it was one of these polymathic skills that I was practicing, because I would put my music up there. And I had my spoken word albums up on MySpace pages, and I learned a skill. And then I had fans, so to speak, who knew what my spoken word stuff was all about. And then I would perform in Toronto and other places. I was down in Geneva, Ohio to give a performance. Kind of random, but I got invited there. I was in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, to do a performance. And it was just, stuff would happen. So I managed quite well, given how poorly I lived. But that's how I would do it. I would get my stuff done before it was due, long before it was due. And that's how I was able to have a small press and make books like this when I was in university. And of course I had a partner, but he was very similar. He just got his stuff done as soon as possible, because it's a drag to have deadlines on your mind all the time. And that's the answer, Solomon writes. All right, let's check in with our live chat here. Let's see. I don't know the Japanese pronunciation of the characters there, sorry, but I know you study, I mean, some of that is katakana, but I just don't know exactly how it all comes together. Is there a so there? So maybe is one of them. So or su is one of them in the hiragana, I think, if memory serves. But in any case, I know you study Chinese. Do you use a memory palace to study Hansa or something like Heisig? So some combination of the two. I don't use Heisig at all, although I found his thing very, very interesting. I use a memory palace for characters, but what I do use is the memory palace and a mind map for Chinese. So that's something to consider. And if you need to know more about that, I mean, search up Chinese on my blog and you'll find some stuff about the mind map that you can have a glance at. But the characters, they're a little bit challenging to me. Also, I do a fair amount of index cards for characters. So this is one, for example. And so this is the dangerous duo for Do. And I chose that not only because dangerous duo, Batman and Robin, actually sounds a little bit like this word, but Batman's ears are a little bit like these characters. But that's still in a memory palace. And in many ways, the card is a memory palace. Anyway, there's all kinds of cards. This is also another one. And the important thing is that the answers aren't usually on the backs of these cards. So they'll be like that. Sometimes I'll have answers on the back. Like here, there's no answer because the reality is I want to test myself using active recall principles. So what the heck was that puzzle? This one has something written on the back, but it's just I needed to make a note for something quite quickly. So it has nothing to do with this. But I'm trying to find a card that has a particular principle for you that you might find useful. But I'm just not finding one of them. But generally, it's just like this, and then no answer on the back. So I have to solve this, and this is Ju for to live. And then sometimes I'm just not finding one that has a principle that I want. But I don't really use cards that much anymore because when I learn new Chinese, I just learn it now without a memory palace element. This is Neirong, which means content. But again, there's no answer on the back. It's not what I'm looking for. Anyway, it's a closed. It's called a closed test, and basically what you do is you leave a part blank, and so just pretend that this is chouette in French. So très chouette, very cool. It's an owl. Very owl is basically what you're saying to say very cool in a shoe, right? So that gives you that sort of word. But if I needed it, I would just write another word clue and then I'd have a blank line, and that's called a closed test. But normally I don't use them, so that's why I'm having a hard time finding them, because it's very rare that I actually use a closed test. And then you do it for symbols too. Like this is operator, and again there's no answer. There's just a guy calling the operator and then a general approximation of what operator looks like. And this is totality, and there you have a totem pole, and again no answer. So just got to work it out. It's a lot of fun. It's very fast too. But these usually have a memory palace involved in them. Anyway, I hope that helps answer the question. But for characters, I tend to use a mind map strategy, and I'm just not prepared to teach it all right now. But it's in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass and so on. John Blue is in the house. Good to see you, John. John, by the way, you got to follow his channel because I've studied Qigong for years, But his channel blew me away because he's got like these granular details of Qigong like I'd never seen before. I don't know why I never seen stuff like that, but he's got like a matrix move in there. I don't know. You're going to be flying around like Neo in the Matrix and dodging bullets and stuff like that. And he sometimes flies in his videos onto the screen. Go check that out. And John says, yep, when I was apprenticing with a Japanese carpenter, I would often sleep in a nearby library at night so I didn't have to drive all the way home. Not great for the function of my mind. No, it's not great, but sometimes we do what we got to do, right? Thanks again for being here. And yeah, I think you know the move I'm talking about, right? So I study his trainings quite a bit because there's like more than 30 now of this 100-day series or 100-session series. And you learn it over and over and over again. And I got to catch up on leaving comments on all of them because I was really busy during the period where I was going through them. But I went through each and every day, and I haven't caught up on comments on each and every one. But do not pass go without going and subscribing to John's channel and get into that Qigong, because I think, as someone who studied it for quite some years from books and various videos, and I took a class at one point, his is just the most extraordinary that I've seen. So start at the day one and then go up and you'll catch up with where I'm at. And then I guess he's going to finish the 100 series. But even if you never had another one and you just did session one over and over and over again, you would be well served. So what are you waiting for? Get on that. Really good. All right. Rob says, I was anti-video games for probably 30 years of my life and realized that it was a mistake to write it off. Apply the same time to life doesn't give the level of feedback required to find the pattern. Yeah, I mean, I'm not anti-video game, but you know, Rob, I'm speaking about the person who's living in mom and dad's basement or attic or whatever, who's really just super video game focused, and there's no integration, there's no balance. And you say patterns that are much deeper in why we stop pushing forward or why we procrastinate or why blah, blah, blah. Video game has certainly given the feedback mechanism that found many patterns. Oh, yeah. And, you know, like I said today, I was like, make the Triforce, right? Well, that is obviously a tremendous value that comes from Zelda. And if I think more about Zelda, I mean, Zelda teaches you persistence, or at least it did when I was a kid. I mean, we didn't have YouTube when I was a kid. And I remember the excitement of working through these poorly worded clues and really making action or feeling accomplishment because we figured it out, right? Which is going to instill greater tenacity in the real world. So there's certainly near transfer and full-on transfer effects. But I think there's a lot of, and you know, too, like people who make a career out of playing video games for a living, bravo. I mean, that's cool. That's entrepreneurship in so many ways. Well, look, this is a PewDiePie cup, and PewDiePie may not be known anymore, but pew-doos. I mean, that dude made a career out of playing video games and being quite silly about it. And part of the success of his career is because I bought one of his cups. So, you know, I'm all in on. I'm not anti-video game. It's really the question of the balance. I myself really don't play them anymore because I find it just makes my mind go in a particular way, and I want to train my brain to read books. And something about eye tracking, I think. Targeted eye tracking gets a little bit messed up for me when I play games, but I certainly enjoyed many hours of playing games, and it's given me something to do a lot of times because I'm a bit of a fidgety person. That's why I often have a pen in my hand or a deck of cards in my hands, etc. Is because I could get through a lot of audiobooks and podcasts just sitting there listening, because otherwise if I lay and meditate listening, I might fall asleep. And I don't like to have digital with me anymore when I go for walks. I like to be in the world listening. So I don't listen to audiobooks when I walk anymore. I don't listen to podcasts when I walk anymore. So that's that. But in any case, everybody has to do what they need to do. Oz91 says, speaking of PewDiePie, his deliberate practice made himself become a great artist after only a year. I haven't followed him forever, so I don't know that, but I don't doubt it. I mean, if you just do what works, you're going to get the result, right? This is not rocket science. The rocket sciencey part is, why are you stuck? What can we do to get you unstuck if you're stuck? And then if you get stuck again, how do you get yourself out? That's the way the world works. Brian's in the house. Good to see you, Brian. Thanks for being here. AI is great, but no matter how many digital mind maps, GPTs, or notebooks, LMs one uses, nothing beats writing things down by hand. One cannot run away from hard work and memory palaces. That's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that very much, because there's always this kind of like replacement idea. Oh, this is going to replace everything, rather than the supplementation. And the people who are probably going to win, I don't know, I'm not going to make a prediction, but most likely the people who are going to win are going to be the people who use it strategically to enhance the experience they're already having and give themselves more time to be polymathic, right? And you can imagine being polymathic without actually having one of your AI knowledge as one of your skill sets, which I think a lot of us would just find it really, really boring and hard when there's other things that we're more passionate about and we could do our priority pyramid. And that's the cool thing about interfaces and software wizards and programmers and stuff like that, is that they allow for us to be able to access technologies like making a live stream, etc. So much easier than it used to be. You used to have conference calls, and those were painful to set up, right? So it's really, really, really important to get our blessings together and be happy, and to use what we've got and not necessarily, replace things. Keep what's good, keep what's beautiful, and I think you'll really benefit from that in the long term. Okay, so I got a section here I want to cover, which is the idea of knowledge integration strategies as part of your polymathic skill set. And one of the things is connecting the dots between multiple fields. Now, this doesn't take that long to cover, because the beauty is, if you memorize a sufficient amount of material, you're going to connect the dots automatically. In fact, you will be connected. It will do you, right? And this is beautiful. So what I would suggest to do is to get, your top 3 things that you want to study. Start to weave them through your week. Maybe an hour on topic A on Monday, with a little bit of interleaving with topic B and C. Then Tuesday, you do C and B and A. And then Wednesday, you do B and C and A, or, these kinds of variations. And then you memorize, and later when you're laying in bed, you do your recall rehearsal. Maybe you get a nice little flashlight that you connect to your journal, and you write out from memory what it is you memorized. Put that aside, and you'll start to find, when you're walking, when you're in the shower, the connecting of the dots will just start to happen. These aha moments will happen. You can accelerate this a little bit by taking hot showers, as they say, and so forth. But you can accelerate it also by writing a lot, writing a ton about what it is that you're thinking and doing. And by writing, I mean summaries, writing emails to friends. Oh, I just learned this thing. Delete this if you want. I'm just writing you to tell you and to practice. Getting in a community, getting in chat groups, writing really long progress journals, ideally by hand, though. I mean, what's going to happen is you might get frustrated if you do it on a forum, because then you get crickets. And then you say, no one's paying attention to what I'm doing. And then you get, it's a downer, right? So if you just do it for yourself and you just write in your own journal without expectation of anybody to care, you're going to get so much better, and the connections are going to come. The other thing about keeping connections flowing is just keep reading. Read and read and read and read, and then read some more. Have some videos, of course, if you want, podcasts, etc. But keep listening for the connections and make connections. So, that song, I haven't heard it since I was a kid, but the thigh bone connects to the whatever bone, the hip bone connects to the whatever bone, and that sort of thing. You can do that. Like, what does this connect to? So one little game that you can play is, let's say a word comes up like proheresis, which is the will in Greek that Marcus Aurelius uses. So proheresis. Well, what else comes up? Well, Prince, the musician, comes up, who I used to help me memorize the word proheresis. But what else comes up? And, you could think through, well, what Prince, you don't have to go alphabetically. Well, Prince makes me think of Zappa. Well, what does Zappa make me think about? And then you can go into, it makes me think of some of the things that his son was recently talking about, Dweezil Zappa. And then you go from Dweezil to D, and you start connecting things. And then you go, oh, I remember, I got to read this book called The Negative Dialectics of Poodle Play, because dialectics, Dweezil, right? And these connections are manufactured. They're not necessarily related. There's not like some big epiphany or insight in there. By the way, that is an actual book, The Negative Dialectics of Poodle Play. But you can go from dialectics to on and on and on, Plato and so forth. So you're starting to make connections. And then in Plato, you might think, okay, so I started here with proheresis, the will, and now I've arrived at Plato. What is Plato's response to the idea of will, right? And I won't go into that speech now, but I wasn't planning that. I just followed this chain of associations, and I actually found something I don't think I've ever really thought of. I haven't thought of the Platonic idea of the will in any particular depth relative to free will. I mean, I have now that I think about it and say it out loud, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's never really quite from the Stoic sense. So the compare and contrast of proheresis in Marcus Aurelius, and then what the Platonic version would be, and then for that matter, the Neoplatonic version. So that's how you connect the dots against the field, or it's a couple ways you can do it. You can mind map, you can draw all kinds of concept maps, and just be collaborative as much as you can with people by having lots and lots of conversations about what you're learning. If you're not a very conversant person, if you're, you like to be more by yourself, do it anyway. I'm very, very much not a social person, but I make myself get out and be more social and meet people and talk to people, because if you don't, you're starving part of your brain. There's a research on what social isolation does to you. And one of the things that social isolation does to you is it starts to shrink parts of your brain. So that is, that's not good. So get out there and make sure that you are making connections, because connections, to connect knowledge, is to connect with other people, because the knowledge is in other people. And memory is not in any one person. The alphabet that I'm using now is in you, it's in me, it's in everybody, right? And so we really, really need to understand that none of us are alone. We are computation machines that compute the same code that everybody else computes. And the more we compute together, the more we're going to get out of it. So those are just some ideas and strategies for making sure that you connect the dots. Documentation is key, and we'll get into that in a little bit, because we have another question from one of our community tab posters. But first, I'm not sure how you pronounce this. Arogyagiri had asked me, how do I deal with burnout, and how do you handle giving certain tasks priority when you would rather have spent your time doing something else? So we already talked about burnout and we talked about priority, but let's get to this thing about how you would rather spend your time doing something else. This is always going to happen, I believe. There's always going to be something that you would rather not do. So the question is, and this is the Brian Tracy book, Eat That Frog, right? So when are you going to prioritize the eating of the frog? And I tend to try to make sure to take care of things early that I don't want to do and just get them out of the way. Because the sooner they're done. Right? And if they're repetitive, can you get rid of the repetitive task? Can you get an automation set up? Can you hire somebody? Whatever the case is. I can't always do those things, but there's always going to be things that you would rather not do. So get them done well, get them done soon, and move on. It's kind of like I used to do in university. I don't like deadlines. I really don't like deadlines. So I got the assignments as soon as possible and I got them done so that I didn't have to do the thinking about the deadline, because I don't like thinking about deadlines. Right? So that's the answer to that. And then Dr. Strapp asked, really good question here. He says that he would like to see a day, a week, a month in the life of me, especially from a recall rehearsal perspective, particularly when there is so much to be practicing and recalling over a long time. I'm assuming this is all tracked in a journal, but do you have scheduling tables or charts, etc.? If so, it'd be great to see examples. Okay, so thanks for that. And here's the thing. A day, a week, a month, it's all the same. It's over and over and over again, the same stuff. It's a beautiful, glorious, eternal repetition of the same. And so that's built deliberately. And it's been that way for a very, very long time. It's one of the reasons why I really wanted to get into grad school, is so I could continue having the same life over and over and over again. And from a recall rehearsal perspective, here's the thing. It's like the previous question in many ways. What would you do? How do you deal with when you'd rather do something else? Recall rehearsal, I get done as soon as I can, as quickly as I can, because it's not necessarily the most fun thing to do. It's very powerful, right? It's like taking out the trash. You just don't like it, but you have to do it, right? No, it's actually much more pleasant than taking out the trash. I take that back. But what I'm trying to say is recall rehearsal is always a challenge, and that's how it builds your memory. So what it looks like is I do it soon, early, and often. And then I try to do it in such a way that it goes down over time. And if I let something get out of recall rehearsal enough that it gets butchered, then I pay the price and I fix it. So today already I have said this phrase, Turtva, Maharnavam, Hatva, Ragadveshti Rakshashan Yoga Shantasenta Yuktatma Ramo Varajate. Those who kill the like-dislike monster go through the ocean of delusion and arrive in tranquility, right? Well, there was a time I was on an interview with Luc Ranieri, and that just came out of my mouth so botched, so broken. And I realized that I just hadn't done it recently enough. And I managed to get it back, but the reality was it had become quite out of tune. So I just owned it and got back into it. Now, why did it fade? I don't know exactly. I've done various tests, like Herming Ebbinghaus had done, to let periods of time pass to see how long it takes for various things to fade. And I don't have any conclusions different than what he has. But in his case, he was using these, what were they called in German? Sinnlose Silben, nonsense syllables or senseless syllables. But my syllables are actually quite meaningful. So I think the reason why I was able to get that back is because I do know what it means. I know what the Sanskrit means. I know what it means in English. So there's that. But generally, I just do the recall rehearsal as quickly as I can to get it into long-term memory, and then I pay the price if I forget something. But I often don't forget things, and I think partly sometimes I just surprise myself, and it sort of falls apart. But in terms of what it looks like for recall rehearsal, basically, well, I have an example for you right here, actually. I recited this poem, Writing is Inhibiting, and I recited it entirely, and I think I got it correct. And basically what it looks like is I memorize it piece by piece, line by line, and I'm trying to find a place where I wrote it out by hand. It's actually quite some days ago. I'm not going to find the exact page, I don't think. And this is getting boring, I'm sure, to watch me try to find a page. But, well, here's the A chapter. So I had recited from memory. Awkward grammar appalls the craftsman, a data bard as daft as Zara, damns stagnant art, and scrawls alpha. So I've actually literally written this out from memory. So basically I spend a little bit of time memorizing in the morning, then later while I'm out at the beach or whatever, I write it out from memory, and then the next day I finish it and I recite it, and I keep going back and forth. With Mandarin words, I memorize them and I come back to it as much as I think that I need to. And how do I remind myself to do it? Years of practice. I literally have just done years of practice. Now in the back, and it becomes procedural memory. If you do the procedure enough, the procedural memory will just get you to do it. It's like going to the gym, where you just crave going to the gym. And today, by the way, is my gym day, and I crave going to it. I have to go to the gym before the day is ended, or I won't feel quite right. Same thing with recall rehearsal. If I just don't do it, I start to not feel right, so I get myself to do it. And I get it done as much as possible. Now, I used to track. I used to use a lot of spreadsheets, but it just became procedural, so I don't need to do it. So the tracking is always just testing in memory. And usually what I do is I just test with handwriting. And, here's a declension table that came out of memory and so on. That's it. That's the answer. That's what it looks like. It's just day after day, same sort of process, same sort of pattern. But it doesn't become more and more over time. It becomes less and less relative to the project. So the better you get at, say, a language like Sanskrit, even though certain sentences might fall apart or actual phrases might fall apart, the actual time I have to spend on Sanskrit is less and less because I know it better and better. Same thing with German. It gets better and better and better and less. Same thing with Mandarin. Better and better and better. I have to spend less and less because is in like so many words, right? And so just now it's just like, well, how are we going to put it in here and remember this, that, and the other thing and so forth? But you just get so familiar with the syllables, basically. They just come again and again and again, and it just becomes easier and easier and easier to the point that you often don't even need the memory palaces, or you compound onto what's already been in a memory palace. In German and Mandarin, for example, I already knew Bereich, which is area. Bereich is area. Bereit is ready. I want Bereit. So I had that in a memory palace. And then in Mandarin, there's Zhuanbei. And so that's also kind of like, are you ready, sort of thing. So Ni Zhuanbei Halama, and then Bist du bereit? Are you ready? Ni Zhuanbei Halama, or Ni Zhuanbei Halama, are you ready, right? So now, Bei and bereit, well, they're basically in the same area of the memory palace, right? I just take what's already established and I add the Mandarin to it. So now recall rehearsal is even faster. And what you'll notice when you do this is that it gets faster and faster, or at least better and better, but you still have to do the recall rehearsal, but you have to do it less a lot of the time. So I don't need to spend any time anymore. When I learned this art, I had to track it and so forth, but now I'm much more loose and I don't use spreadsheets anymore. Now, sometimes my margin of error is a little bit higher, but not too badly, and I'm happy with it, basically. So that's that. And I think everybody should be happy with making mistakes. They give you a lesson, and who cares? I mean, you made a mistake, big deal. People make mistakes, right? The cumulative effect over time is really going to shine, and it's just because so few people memorize things, it really stands out when you go, oh, for a muse of fire that could ascend the brightest heaven of invention, kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold our swelling scene. It's just like, whoa, where the hell did that come from? And then if you're talking and you start to relay all these facts and you're just like, oh yeah, that was Meister Eckhart's Sermon 19, and then, oh, this came from Costacan, and oh, that's in the book of Chuang-Tzu, and then, oh yeah, that's Pema Chodron or whatever, right? You're just going to compound, but you have to put it in the practice. So daily memorization, daily reading, daily writing is really the key at the end of the day. The doing. Doing is the origin of the creativity. It's the origin of the confidence. It's the origin of the consistency. Doing. And, the whole point is the old Yoda stuff. Do or do not. There is no try. And so, yeah, I can't give examples of scheduling tables or charts. Part of the reason why is because I've already shared today. I don't use to-do lists that way. I describe when I need to, what I have done and when I have done it, as opposed to writing it. Anyway, there's some examples that I've shared here there of what those things look like. I don't have one today, but as the Oz91 says here in the chat, sometimes the reward for recovering from mistakes is even higher than if one were to succeed in the first place. That's right. And not only that, but often you don't get any rewards if you don't make some mistakes. When I play music, I always make mistakes learning the song. When I learn a poem or I learn a phrase or a word, I always make mistakes. And this is a kind of thing you can't fear, especially in language learning. You've just got to make mistakes. And, I've got dental problems and problems with my mouth and so forth. That it makes pronunciation quite difficult for me. And, you may hear that my voice is getting more and more challenged and that my mouth is also challenged. So I just don't worry about it. There's always going to be critics and all that sort of stuff, which is kind of like where we started. So to wrap everything up, overcoming fear is the number one thing. You're going to get criticized. You're going to get into places where you don't know how things are going to turn out. That's just the way that it is. And you may not even know whether you've made the right choice to study a particular topic. But I would suggest always 90 days. And if if you don't spend 90 days on something, you really haven't explored it well enough to figure out just how bad the bad stuff is, right? Unless you're in danger or something like that. You then get out, obviously. But there are some people just give up way too soon on so many things. So give it a good old college try. College try semesters are around 22 weeks, something like that. Depends which school it is. That's like a full program. Maybe you don't need that long, but 90 days is habit formation and so forth. So I would really, really, really encourage you to make sure that you actually are paying your dues before you decide. There's just too many people giving up on things when it's too soon to tell. It's too soon to tell. So, am I Canadian? Why? Do I sound Canadian? To be honest, these days, I don't even know anymore exactly what I am. Other than that, I am an author, and one of my most recent books is The Memory Advantage. And I gave it the old college try when I wanted to be a writer. And really, that's all it is. Sitting down, getting words on the page, revising them, and having research and experiences that make the books that you write worth reading. So thanks, everybody, for being here today. If you want to grab the Memory Advantage, there's a special going on right now. And I wish you luck on your polymathic explorations and journeys. And I thank everybody who supports the Magnetic Mary Method project in whichever way that you are able. I have some crazy, exciting stuff coming up in 2025, and I'm not exaggerating. It's mind-blowing what's going on. It's very difficult. It's very challenging. I am way outside of my comfort zone. So when I say, you're never going to escape the unknown and you got to deal with the fear and all that sort of stuff, I'm living it. And the risk that I've taken on to pull something off, it's like way bigger than writing a detective novel that might offend some people because it's got some sort of scenarios in it. This is, things are getting real. Real in the realest sense possible. So Ally Joy wishes me luck. Thank you. I wish you luck as well. The beauty of it is that we don't really need luck in this particular context. We need strategy, focus, follow through, study, analysis, reanalysis, implementation, and we need, as Tennyson said, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. That's the key. So thank you again, everybody. And until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic.
Hey, everybody. So I'm here in the Atlanta airport. I was just thinking about how grateful and thankful I am for what Anthony did for me. I do seminars all across the country. Usually have about 100 to 300 people every single weekend. And one of my biggest goals was to be able to memorize their names, and started studying some stuff and learning. And it wasn't connecting as fast as it needed to, and I just wasn't connecting the dots, and started doing some research online, and there I found Anthony. And Anthony, I just want to tell you thank you very much for all that you've done. Now, it's my memorization is through the roof. I've almost reached my goal of getting 300 people at one time. I'm not exactly there yet. I'm off just by a few, but I'll get there as I keep practicing and keep connecting what I've learned from you. And what you've put and you've helped me with. And so I just want to tell everybody, if you're looking to take your memory palaces and your memory techniques to the next level, Anthony's the guy. If he can help me go from not even remembering people's names, and that's the biggest issue of my life in my seminars, to actually being able to memorize over 100 and something people's names, close to 200, man, he can help any of you guys out with anything. So I just want to give a shout out to Anthony. Very thankful, very grateful for meeting you. Very thankful for the fact that as soon as I sent you an email, you responded very quickly, very promptly. You just opened up your time and gave me a scheduled time very quickly also. And the support afterwards was well above and beyond. You could have ended it right there, but he didn't. He kept emailing me and make sure I was okay, and would send me emails periodically to make sure that I was following up and following through. So again, just want to thank you very much, Anthony. As I'm walking through this airport, getting ready to jump on a plane in Seattle, I was just thinking about how grateful and thankful I am for you being in my life and for helping me take those steps to the next level. And if anyone is out there is ever thinking about, should I work with Anthony? The answer is absolutely, unequivocally yes, beyond the shadow of a doubt. I could probably keep going on and on. But again, thank you, Anthony. And I really appreciate you. You've been a blessing in my life.